I'll press the button now.
Okay.
Okay, we are live. I think. Yes, we are. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another live recording of Keeping Karlsson. We got a packed one for today. I don't even know how far. We're just gonna go until we run out of energy. Right? It's like a dance-a-thon, a
So we can't go
podcast-a-thon.
no mo. Podcast-a-thon.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's been done.
I have a lot of notes here. I don't think we can do more than 2 hours, right?
You have a lot of notes. You mean you don't think we can do less than 2 hours?
Yeah, like I want to stop after 2 hours. Maybe we'll just do an extra show later in the week. Do a third
Yeah.
hour.
Well, yeah. Well, that'll be tricky to schedule, but we will. But let's go for 2 tight hours here, and we'll see how we do.
Yeah, Shams. Exactly. Yeah, I'm back on the Sens train. Very observant.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I didn't feel comfortable wearing a Sens hat for a while. They sucked. They were annoying. They never did anything.
Yeah.
Now it's like this team's great.
Now, is
They're
this
fun.
the Karlsson hat or the Sens hat?
This is the Sens hat. I have the Karlsson hat. I'll wear that sometimes too. But the thing is, like, Karlsson isn't on the Sens, and right now I'm not even worried about him. I'm thinking about. I mean, Brent Burns is gone. We'll discuss the impact that's coming soon. But for now, I'm just focused on how exciting the Sens are going to be.
You can show off your hat and like how I've had this hat for like since the dark days, man.
Well, the thing is, like, you know
with
me,
you.
Brian, I'm not a homer anymore. Like, I'm legit into the Sens, not like you, like, like because I'm from Ottawa. Like last year how I was into Florida. It's just like this is the team that excites me the most right now.
They're very exciting.
I want to see what's going to happen.
It's crazy how quickly it all happened.
I know. They just needed D. But we'll discuss. We got a whole show for this. All right.
They do. I think they're good.
They're fine.
You think they need D?
We'll see how good Jake Sanderson is.
I think he's ready.
I mean, he's ready to like play? Is he ready to be an impact?
Also
like
Bernard Docker and Lassie Thompson.
Are they all like ready? I don't know.
I mean, they can take their step. We can talk about it on the show. They can take their steps over a year or two. Like,
I want them to do well next year. I want them to.
I think they have enough to do well next. I think that it'll be interesting.
We'll see. We'll discuss.
Can you name? I should
Artem Zub.
I wasn't asking about the defense. I think the challenge now is to name an Ottawa Senator outside the top 6.
Nick Paul. No, just kidding. He got traded. I could do that. Formanton.
Okay, good job.
Who was that young guy that people? It wasn't Nick Paul. There was another young. Oh, Pinto. Shane Pinto. People were into him.
Who was injured for most of last year.
Do they still have any of these like bozos, like a Tierney or like one of these just like old guys? Do they have any of those left?
They have Austin Watson, who I think fills the role. And
what about Joseph, who they got last year?
They have Matthew Joseph.
Yeah.
And
poor Matt. He's the biggest loser. We should put that down on the show. He's the one who gets hurt the most from all the Sens moves. Yeah. I forgot about him. I'm just gonna write that down right here. Biggest loser. That's a TV show, The Biggest Loser.
I think Alex Formanton is equally a loser.
But who was going to draft? Like Matthew Joseph was actually looking like someone who could be something.
I don't. Yeah, I actually don't.
Well, you don't. Obviously, you knew all along. But us plebs that just look at the score sheet, we're noticing someone in the top line like producing. Okay.
Yeah.
So
no more Colin White, no more Connor Brown, no more Chris Tierney. They really they cleaned some house. Which is funny because you wouldn't have thought there was much house to clean.
Okay. Let's start the show. Ready?
I am so ready.
Okay. Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who would probably accept less money in exchange for staying on our current podcast network. I'm not sure. Maybe where we would move to a different podcast network. Okay, wait. I didn't have the joke ready in my head. I was sort of halfway there.
Yeah, we're not gonna.
I was thinking of how like Gaudreau accepted less money to go to a better place, but I guess I shouldn't mention the podcast network. Okay. Buddy! To another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who would gladly accept less money in exchange for being able to stay recording in front of all of our happy listeners. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm trying to make a reference to Gaudreau and how he took less money because he would rather be in Columbus, but I don't know. I sort of making that up on the fly. Anyways, I'm your host, Elon Dubrowski. We don't have time to dig into the intro because we've got so much to talk about today. So much so that this is part one of I don't know how many parts, maybe 1,000 parts, but we're going to just go through as much as we can over the next couple hours. And with me to break down all of the signings and the trades and all the craziness from last week, it's my very good friend, the Poobah prognostication, the IPP MVP, your friend and mine, the fantasy hockey robot, Brian Com.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us after what was a wild free agency period, which I was following along closely on our Discord server. Like I was kind of offline for the day, but the one thing I was able to do pretty regularly to know where I could get the news. Actually, it was thanks to the Game Day news. Like that's amazing. GameDayTweets.com if you're not familiar. If you just want the news, that's such a great place to go. If you just have a second to check your phone, that's the place for you to go, or our Discord server where we follow along too. Anyway, there's so much to talk about. I've tried to save some thoughts for the show. I'll be repeating some for sure that I've already shared, but I'm really excited. I've got a whole backlog of thoughts and ideas on the fantasy impacts of all the player movement we saw through free agency. I'm ready to let them out.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a rare podcast, right? Like, obviously, there's been lots of different people talking about everything going on, but we're looking into the fantasy impact, who's gone up, who's gone down, who's affected by everything going on. So I think this is going to be really interesting to go through. Obviously, the order is very arbitrary. I'm going to start with what I think is the most impactful move, and then from there, I'm going to try to tie everything together. I'm putting my hosting skills to the challenge, okay, to see if I could make sort of a narrative through everything that went on. I want to start. Actually, first, let's start by mentioning that we're presented by DobberHockey.com, which was also, Brian, a really great place that I was going to check out a lot. I guess it's not as much for the breaking news, but for the breakdowns right after the breaking news. They're always on top of it with, the transaction impacts of everything going on, like with the daily ramblings and just the articles. It's the best site, okay? And also, I use Frozen Tools to prep the show, so it's the best. DobberHockey.com. But with that, Brian, let's start in Columbus. Okay, we got it. It was the marquee UFA of this crop, Johnny Gaudreau, coming off a career year, 40 goals, 115 points, has decided to take his talents to Columbus on a 7-year, 9.75 AAV deal, even though Calgary offered more money and term. But he was like, I don't know about living in Canada. And yeah, you do you, Johnny. And now he's going to be in Columbus for the remainder of his prime. Obviously, it was perfect timing for him to have this amazing season. He had 2 straight 70-ish point pace seasons leading into this past one, but he saved his best for the contract campaign, cashed in big time. So now Gaudreau goes from his insanely successful line with Lindholm and Kachuk to, I'd assume, a best case, with Patrick Laine, I guess, that, which is pretty great, right? Being able to play with Laine. And then the first center, who knows? I don't know, Roslovic, Boone Cole Sillinger, someone's going to be there to center Gaudreau and Laine. I don't know. It could also be Bjorkstrand and Laine goes to another line. Obviously, I'm just trying to think of sort of what's the impact. Is it better or worse? He does get a similarly paid Zach Werenski as his top power play quarterback, which I think does sound like an upgrade to me, over Rasmus Anderson. He never really blew our socks off over in Calgary. So that's kind of nice. I guess what you can kind of get what I'm trying to figure out here is is Gaudreau, does his fantasy value go up? Does it go down? Does it stay the same? So I'm just kind of thinking of through who are the players that he's replacing and who he's replacing them with. In the end, Brian, what do you think this means for Gaudreau? We did our patron rankings. We've been doing it for a while now. Every single day we vote on someone else. Already Gaudreau has been ranked, of course. He went 26th overall. Do you think that if we were to restart now, you'd be voting for him to hold that same spot around 26th, or does he go up, or does he fall a bit going from Calgary to Columbus?
So just for context, 26 means that he went just behind Jack Hughes and Steven Stamkos, and Gaudreau went ahead of the other forwards he went ahead of were Eichel, Zibanejad, JT Miller, Sebastian Aho, Timo Meyer, Brad Marchand, Drayson Robinson. I'm reading this list and going as far down as I am. Landeskog, DeBrincat, Philip Forsberg, because I'm trying to find the place where I would stop and say, yeah, I'd want Gaudreau ahead of that guy now, because he has fallen on my draft list because of this move to Columbus. And this is not just a simplistic Columbus plays a more defensive game take, or they don't have as much, they're not as offensive a team as Calgary was, which is true. But that's been the really easy thing to say about Columbus for the last couple of years. It's yeah, you go to Columbus, you're not going to be the most offensive player, which is true to some extent, but I don't think it's quite as simple as that. because not only is Johnny Gaudreau going to Columbus, but he's leaving a lot behind in Calgary. What he's leaving behind, if you remember when we talked about Gaudreau for our surprise party episode, I think he was on the second part of it, where we were just elated to see Gaudreau explode for the 115 points he had in his age 28 season. And that was after like a lot of inconsistency, right? Like it seemed like Gaudreau had never done the same thing for 2 consecutive years. And after the season Gaudreau had in Calgary, we looked at him and like, yeah, I think he could do this again, assuming he's in the same place, which now he's not. So I want to sort of dig into, the reasons we said that he was successful in Calgary. I want to dig into those and see if they're going to be present in Columbus. So one reason that Gaudreau was so successful in Calgary was that ridiculously good top line, one of the best lines in the league last season, Gaudreau, Tkachuk, and Lindholm. And I don't think he has line mates in Columbus who are going to be as good as either of those guys. I think he's downgrading both his pieces, like is a centerman Boone Jenner, Cole Sillinger, perhaps. And like, we saw, I'm bringing this up because in Calgary, when he was playing with Sean Monahan, it went really well that one year. It didn't go so well the others that followed it. And I'd like to think that Jenner and Sillinger are better than Monahan, but we saw the difference that a really top tier first line center, how much that could elevate Gaudreau's game. And Elon, I know how strongly you feel about Boone Jenner, but I'm just not sure he's as good a top line center as Elias Lindholm was for Johnny Gaudreau. So
that's such a hot take. Like I'll agree with that. But Patrick Laine is really good. Maybe he could be similar to Matthew Tkachuk. I don't know.
All right. Well, here's the other piece I'll give you is that for Laine, is he going to play with Laine? Because if you remember last season when the Blue Jackets had Laine, they went in and got Voracek too. And it's like, yeah, Columbus plans for many happy years with these two paired together. Voracek's the feeder, Laine's the converter. So does that mean that Gaudreau actually isn't playing with either one of them and is playing on another line with, I don't know, Nyquist, Bjorkstrand, someone else? So the thought that maybe Gaudreau isn't on a number 1 line, but instead a 1A or a 1B line, also a little concerning. And speaking further to the quality of teammate that we can expect for Gaudreau in Columbus, like last year, Johnny Gaudreau did as well as he did thanks to an on-ice shooting percentage of 5-on-5 that was above 13%, which we would often say is unsustainable. But that line was clicking so freaking well and in an elite way that, yeah, elite lines and players can keep up a higher than usual on-ice shooting percentage. For context, the top on-ice shooting percentage in Columbus belonged to Max Domi at just 11%, and Nyquist and Laine were the only others above 10% on ice shooting at 5-on-5. So again, Gaudreau is a guy who is a pass first player. He's going to need a lot of converting happening around him to succeed. And I just don't see that happening. Like he had 40 goals last year, of course, but the 2 years before that, he paced for 25, 20 goals like that. He's sort of in the 25 goal area. So you really want him to be able to play with guys he can set up. I'd love for Bjorkstrand to be that person. But again, who's the center? So a lot of questions about deployment. And then I'll also toss in the other question I have about how well it will sustain in the transition from Calgary to Columbus is Gaudreau's power play production. He had huge power play production last season, 6 power play goals, 25 power play points. And looking at Gaudreau's role, I took a look and yeah, he played mostly on the left side. Well, guess who plays on the left side of the unit in Columbus? It's Patrick Laine. So is he going to displace Patrick Laine? That's where Gaudreau sort of roamed and would feed, like Gaudreau was a huge shooter with Tkachuk, and he'd either feed Tkachuk or Lindholm or take a shot, and then they'd, work on the rebound. In Columbus, you have Laine on the left side where Gaudreau roamed in Calgary, and Laine was the only shooter. Like the next most was Werenski, and he wasn't shooting anywhere near where Gaudreau and Tkachuk were. So maybe there is room to add a second shooter on that Columbus power play in Gaudreau. I just don't know where those shots are going to come from. And Boone Jenner would be sort of the Elias Lindholm comparable. So I guess my question is Columbus, with this big marquee acquisition, are they going to change their power play to accommodate Gaudreau and help him put up another 25 power play points? Because I think they're going to have to, to be able to get the most out of him with the man advantage, or for him to keep doing what he did last year. Calgary also had a better power play overall than Columbus last year. So that's another sort of red flag. So overall, I mean, I'm sure you get the gist of this. Columbus ain't Calgary. And like, it wasn't just Calgary, it was that one line, which is now gone. And Gaudreau, this isn't like, I'm trying to think of another player like Panarin, who, he came to Columbus and was great no matter who he played with. He left Columbus, he did even better. I'm not sure Gaudreau can do things the way Panarin does. I don't think he can drive the line himself. I think he's going to need a couple helping hands to get up and above 70 points. And I'm concerned that they're not going to be there, and nor will that power play role that he was able to play to perfection last year. So yeah, I'm worried about Johnny Gaudreau, and I would bump him a fair number of places down our patron rankings draft board.
Yeah, it's all fair. Like, honestly, like, obviously I'm coming in trying to be excited, be the one that's the positive guy, then let you pour the bucket of water. Like, I would say, if I want to say counterpoints to what you're saying, you're like, Columbus isn't as good as Calgary, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, that was Calgary with Johnny Gaudreau, and that was Columbus without Johnny Gaudreau. So, like, all of a sudden now we're shifting maybe the best offensive player from one team to the other. So we'll have to see what that impact is. But I do agree with you that it is something to be concerned about. And you know me also, I get a little wary of a player on a new team. Who knows if maybe he won't gel like as amazingly right away. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to be projecting him at 115 points. I'd love for him to do better than like the 70-ish that he was doing the years before. Like maybe he can be point per game, somewhere around there. Like if you look at Panarin in Columbus, he was like a 90-ish point player, which would still be great, but also a step down from what Gaudreau did last year. So I think that's kind of the ceiling of what I'd be expecting, at least for now. But okay.
Sorry, what did you say the ceiling was?
To like what Panarin was doing in Columbus, like around 90 points ish.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I can see.
I'll follow. And I just think that's a little high to expect from Gaudreau. Like I said, I don't think he's quite Panarin, and I think I don't even know if he'll have Panarin's deployment. We'll have to see how Columbus.
Yeah, I was saying ceiling. Brian, I'm trying to say what's the most ceiling, I'm expecting. Sure. Yeah,
but I said around.
I said around a half point per game.
Gaudreau had 70-point paces in the 2 seasons before this last explosion. And those 2 70-point seasons followed his last explosion before that one. Honestly, that's about where I'm expecting him to land this year. It'd be great if he could approach point per game. And upside is there for a little bit above a point per game. But yeah, I'd be thinking of him as in the 75-point range.
Right. So basically you're saying you're not drafting him because obviously someone is going to be expecting him to be at least somewhat similar to last year. Definitely. We'll see.
He'll definitely go earlier than last year because last year he was a 70-point player. I think that there's going to be, it depends on who you're drafting against, right? There's going to be enough people who are just turned off by the fact that he went to Columbus to just leave him.
But you're saying that you're expecting him to be like a 75-point guy. There's going to be at least one person in your whole league that expects him to be somewhere in between 75 and 115. So
I'll be very curious to see.
I'll be shocked if you end up with Gaudreau in your couple division.
It's unlikely the way I'm valuing him, but I want to know how many 100-point guys he's going to be drafted alongside. Like, is he going to be the last player of all, like, there were like 22 who had 100-point seasons or 25. Is he going to be the last one of the group? Is he even going to be in the group, or is he? I'm curious to see who he's drafted around, because I think I don't think people are going to treat him at their draft tables as a 100-plus point player. I really don't.
Okay, well, yeah, so that'll be something to watch, and that'll be something we'll learn about even earlier than when we learn about how good he actually is in Columbus. But of course, okay, one thing we know for sure is that he's a great player, and he's going to help the people he's playing with, to play with someone with more talent. So let's look at some of the other guys. Like if you look at Columbus, I'd imagine I'm just going to run through a list of players. Like to me, it's for sure got to be good news for Werenski. Like he's going to be having just another great offensive player on his team. Hopefully, unless you're saying maybe if he was taking shots on the power play, now those shots go to Gaudreau. But I'm pretty excited. Like Werenski had a 58-point pace last season. I feel like he's still kind of underrated. Like I feel like maybe even going into next year, he's still a little underrated, and he's someone I'd be very excited to draft now that he'll be on a power play with both Gaudreau and Patrick Laine. Laine, I guess you were saying that there's a decent chance that he sticks with Voracek, but still on the power play. I feel like this can't be bad for him. I don't see him getting bumped or whatever, like to the bottom six, right? So either he sticks on the same line or he just gets to play with Gaudreau. He still has to sign a contract, but I'm sure he will. Then you look at someone like Boone Jenner. Like I feel like he already had like this amazing breakout season last year, so I don't expect him to like be like so much better. But maybe that now he has a better chance to hold it, because I actually think he's probably going to hold that spot on the top power play. Like you still need a net front guy, and Johnny Gaudreau is not that. And Jenner seemed to do really well there. I like this for Elvis Merzlikins, by the way, because just Columbus already was looking like a team a bit on the rise. They did a lot better last year than a lot of people were expecting. Now they all of a sudden bring in Gaudreau, and they have obviously all these like young players like a Cole Sillinger and a Boqvist and whoever else that's going to be continuing to mature. So I feel like Merzlikins is someone who could be a decent sleeper-ish type guy, depending on how far he falls in drafts. Of course, someone's got to take a hit, right? Like there is going to be a winger that doesn't get in on the top power play, right? Because let's say, assuming Jenner holds that net front spot, that leaves only 3 wing spots left for like Gaudreau, Laine, Voracek, Bjorkstrand. So I don't know. Apparently, like, also, by the way, Columbus is like right up against the cap, and they still have to sign Patrick Laine. So it's almost like guaranteed that they're going to have to move some people out. So maybe it's not even worth us like having a big debate about who sort of loses out, because like someone like a Nyquist could get traded. Like we don't know. Like I think that it's very obvious, and from what I've been reading on Twitter, like they're going to be dumping someone. They just don't have a choice. So, but just something to keep in mind that obviously there's only so many sweet spots with Johnny Gaudreau or in the top 6 to go around. So. Yeah, I don't know if you have any comments about any of these like risers and fallers that I'm suggesting. One thing I will say is that I don't know if like they signed Eric Goodbranson to a 4-year contract, $4 million per year, and now they're in this cap crunch. I wonder if they realized when they made that signing that they were going to be getting Gaudreau, and I wonder if they would have considered going for someone a little cheaper.
Hearing from Jarmo Kekalainen and like how it came about, I don't think the Blue Jackets were expecting to be in on Gaudreau. It sounds like they weren't even, from the interview I read, it seemed like he hadn't even really considered it until Gaudreau's people got in touch with him and like, hey, yeah, we think he might want to go to Columbus. And oh, okay, we better get to work on this. And so, yeah, I'm not sure when exactly the Goodbranson signing happened along that timeline. Look, enough people have said enough about Goodbranson's such a funny player just because everywhere he goes, the fans don't appreciate him. Like they don't like him, but coaches and GMs love this guy. He gets minutes, he gets contracts. He was drafted in the top 4 along with Shannon Bogosian in the Steven Stamkos draft. Like those 3D were all like considered to be like huge, can't miss, amazing prospects. All of them have kind of missed. And Goodbranson probably the most, but we're not here to talk about Eric Goodbranson in Columbus. I will say the fantasy impact to me of Gaudreau arriving, I don't think it bumps everybody, like anybody incredibly. Like, yeah, maybe it helps Laine and Voracek on the power play and Jenner. Like maybe there's a couple more power play goals to go around, but I don't think it makes any significant difference. I think what it does is it like reinforces Werenski and Laine and Voracek and Jenner. Like it makes me less worried that something's going to go wrong somewhere on the team that's going to have a really big negative impact on them, because Johnny Gaudreau is there or is still there, even if something isn't clicking or going right. So I like that there's one more player to sort of help keep things moving if things become stagnant or start going the wrong way. I like that about Gaudreau being there. I think if one player stands to gain here, it's Cole Sillinger. Brian Hedger spoke really positively about Sillinger in the 32 Beats interview that we aired earlier this summer, which is still available to anybody listening, by the way. So I think that's one player that really benefits here, because now it means Cole Sillinger is going to have someone pretty darn good to play with. I assume it's going to be Gaudreau or Laine and not both.
Yeah, I mean, just to make it clear, like I see like 3 centers, right? So I feel like it just depends who's the one in the bottom 6. Like it could be Roslovic, it could be Sillinger, and it could be Jenner.
Yeah.
2 of them, like one of them's going to get, like I guess Laine, and one's going to get Gaudreau under your situation. So someone is going to get the short end of the stick. But yeah, Sillinger definitely has a shot.
I'm basically going off of Brian, like my assumptions made from listening to the Brian Hedger interview. He seemed to be higher on Sillinger than Roslovic, although Roslovic could be like the one more in line for a shot. So we'll see. It's going to help one centerman. And then if it hurts anybody, I think it's Oliver Bjorkstrand, but we'll see. Maybe he is the piece that gets moved out. Like Bjorkstrand probably helps him at 5-on-5, because now there's 3 wingers he could play with instead of 2, which means like if 2 of them were on the other line, that would be good for Bjorkstrand. But of course, it could hurt Bjorkstrand on the power play, where I'm going to assume he becomes the odd one out with Gaudreau's arrival.
Yeah, and theoretically, Bjorkstrand could be in the bottom six, right? Like if you have, let's say, Line and Voracek on one line and Gaudreau and Nyquist on the other,
Yeah, I
who
mean, we've
knows?
seen Bjorkstrand get like terrible minutes and terrible deployment. I mean, I think you'd have to be crazy to play Gustav Nyquist ahead of Bjorkstrand on your depth chart. Like to me, that's great. But thank you for reminding me that this is indeed possible.
All right, so let's move on from Columbus. Now let's go to Calgary. Let's look at the other side here. Hunter Mooney here in the chat said, "My life is pain." I guess this is a Flames fan. He also wrote, "It's not looking good on the Kachuk end either." So yeah, let's look at that because Matthew Kachuk and Elias Lindholm, who you were just showering praise on a few minutes ago, had huge career years. Right, they both scored 42 goals. Kachuk ended up with 104 points. Lindholm 82 points. This was again due to this amazing line in power play with Johnny Gaudreau. Now they don't have Gaudreau, so Calgary could still make some moves with the money they now have available. But for now, I think we've just got to assume that it's going to be someone like a Tyler Toffoli or maybe a Mangiapane subbing in for Gaudreau. Brian, does this like indicate a likely downtick for Kachuk and Lindholm? Like as much as we like Tyler Toffoli and Andrew Mangiapane on the podcast, these guys are not Johnny Gaudreau, and there's not really like I guess Nazem Kadri is the best available free agent, and I guess like theoretically he could come in as the center, and then Lindholm moves to the wing. But now I'm like really like really searching for something that could be somewhat similar to Gaudreau. I think in general it's just a question of are Kachuk and Lindholm like just so amazing that they could continue to produce like this without that key part of their line and power play, or should we just assume that both of them are not going to continue what they did last year?
I'm going to expect a bit of a downtick from both of them. If Toffoli, I know you don't like the handedness thing, Elon, but Toffoli shoots right and Gaudreau shoots left. And I think if Toffoli could just slide in, I feel like he could be a similar player to Johnny Gaudreau if he shot the same way, but he doesn't. So it's not as simple.
Wow, you love Tyler Toffoli. You just compared him to a 115-point player. I didn't realize you were that high on him.
I think he could be really, really great. I mean, we saw a glimpse of what he did in Vancouver, right? For that really brief moment where he was finally like unleashed. And then I don't know. I thought we were on the same page with Toffoli, actually. So I'm surprised.
I like Toffoli. I just when you say like you think he could be as good as Gaudreau, it's just to me it's like wow.
I'm not saying Toffoli could necessarily be the 150. I'm saying he could slide in well enough that Kachuk and Lindholm wouldn't miss too many beats.
But you're saying it doesn't matter because he's right-handed.
It's not going to be as smooth because if he does end up on the top line, he's shooting on the other side, and that's going to change something about the way the line works. And then Andrew Mangiapane is a left-handed shot. He could slide in, but of course plays a different game than Gaudreau and Toffoli, and isn't as good as either of those guys offensively. So it's going to be tough for Lindholm and Kachuk to keep doing what they're doing because I think all three of those guys fed off each other. And I think taking any one of them, I mean, we saw what Kachuk being added to the line did to elevate Lindholm and Gaudreau. And I worry about taking away Gaudreau, what that does to, what's the opposite of elevate? De-escalate?
I don't know. Plummet.
To plummet. It's like I don't want to be overly dramatic about a plummeting Lindholm and Kachuk, but yeah, it's not going to be as good. I'd bump them a couple spots down your draft boards too.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Okay, so we'll wait to see. We're still waiting for the first positive from one of these moves from Brian. So far, it's everyone hurts, except for, I guess, some of these Columbus guys. You said to get a marginal maybe increase or at least some more stability. But yeah, and of course, Matthew Kachuk also currently a free agent, so we'll see if he gets offer sheeted or just gets a one-year contract. I don't know. Anyhow, that's Calgary. Oh, we should mention, though, that, by the way, even if Andrew Mangiapane isn't as good as Gaudreau, if he gets on that top line, he's someone I'm interested in drafting. Yeah, he like someone's going to benefit, right? Toffoli, if he could go on the other side or whatever, they work something out. Or Mangiapane. Are you with me that those are the best two candidates to kind of take over the role that Gaudreau? Is there any dark horse that you're looking at?
No one who's on the roster right now.
Right, like, but they do have money.
They have money. They have space. They had all the money they were going to give to Johnny Gaudreau. I mean, this roster, looking at the depth chart, looks like it's missing. And like, I feel for you, Flames fans. Like, this sucks. You had this glorious window just appear, open. Like, you've been waiting for it. It's been slowly building. But Calgary was a cup contender last year, and it feels like this one blow takes away so much of that. So I wish you all the best. This is a really tough one. This would like to have the window. It feels to me like a window slammed shut, or at least on its way to slamming shut, unless they do something. I could see, Calgary feeling like, oh, well, we'll just go ahead and give all this money to Nazem Kadri. He could be the Bobby Ryan to Gaudreau's Daniel Alfredson to make an Ottawa Senators analogy. Like the Sens lost Albertson unexpectedly, and then they went out and added Bobby Ryan like within very, very quickly to try and appease the fan base. And it didn't work out very well on the back end, but it was something.
But we're into Nazem Kadri, right? Like maybe not to continue what he did last year, but I feel like he would definitely help, at least in the short term. Obviously, he gets like a 7-year deal. Maybe that hurts a little bit at the end. I guess another way that they can use the money is like John Klingberg is still available, and he's someone. And I guess we don't want to get too much into speculating. We'll just talk about it when it happens. But we've been talking about for like a couple seasons now. Like last year, I guess we finally sort of wrapped our heads around like Rasmus Anderson is like fine running that top power play, and I guess like you say, Brian, it actually did pretty well. But I wonder if like they have this money anyways, maybe they could make some room for Klingberg. So we'll see what Calgary does, and then we'll talk about them on the next episode. So we were talking, of course, about Elias Lindholm, and he used to be on the Carolina Hurricanes, and I think they are another team that made a big splash this past week, and not really with any big UFA signings. And in fact, they started the process by losing one of their key free agents in Anthony DeAngelo, who they traded to Philly for 3 mid-round picks. But instead, they made their mark with 2 huge trades. So first, they acquired Brent Burns with 33% of his contract retained from the Sharks. They also got Lane Peterson, and they sent Stephen Lawrence, a goalie prospect, Makiniemi, and a third. So whatever. Basically, the main part of the deal is probably just that Brent Burns, it comes off the books for San Jose, or at least 67% of him does. Then the other big move Carolina made is they acquired Max Pacioretty and Dylan Coughlin from Vegas for nothing. Absolutely nothing. Stupid! Tweet at us if you get that reference. Okay, I just had to. So to recap, the Canes just got 2 of the biggest fantasy producers of like the past 5-6 years, like for basically just having the cap space to take them on. So clearly, this is a team that has been saved. It's like a kid, put some money in the piggy bank, wait for the right moment where you can finally like get what you're saving up for. And this is what the Canes have decided to do with this savings. They've got Burns and Pacioretty, obviously 2 older players, some risk there, but man, also some huge reward. And I'm really excited to talk through what these guys are going to look like now that they're on Carolina, this really strong team. They were already a really strong team. They just got Burns and Pacioretty for free, and I guess they just lose Anthony DeAngelo. Let's start with Brent Burns. Okay, Brian, I'm gonna need you to cool me off here because I'm higher on, like with Gaudreau. I was sort of like playing it up because we're doing a podcast. He was the first guy I'm talking about. I'm not going to be like, this guy's not going to be as good right from the bat. I'll leave that to you. But with Burns, come on, this has got to be huge, right? Like, yeah, he's 37, but he just put up 54 points last season. Clearly, still like he's not like breaking down. He like had huge minutes. He played most minutes of his career, and like fine, that's like San Jose had.
But
maybe.
Is that a good thing?
Sure, fair enough. But I'm just saying he's capable. Like his body is not like he's capable of still playing big minutes and still producing 54 points on a meh Sharks team. Now he gets to QB a Canes power play because there's nobody, this is like there's no way like Slavin is taking top power play over Brent Burns. I can't imagine. So he's going to be QBing a Canes power play with Aho, Teravainen, Svechnikov, and Pacioretty. What a 5 for the top power play. Plus, maybe he gets the green light to start shooting a little more like he used to. I don't know if maybe San Jose realized because before like I think he would shoot and then like someone like Pavelski would be able to like cash in on the rebounds, do something. And the last couple of years San Jose Burns taking his shots from the point wasn't that successful, so he stopped shooting. That's what I'm kind of assuming happened with him. And so I'm ready for you to tell me I'm overreacting, but in my opinion, Burns, I'm going to say it, someone has to be it. I think he's the player whose fantasy value has risen the most in the past week. And I'll wait for you as we go through this episode to tell me if there's someone else that you think went up more. But I am stoked for Brent Burns on Carolina. I guess I'll throw to you here before we talk about Pacioretty. But this is such a great landing spot for him, in my opinion.
It's a great landing spot for Brent Burns. Like I like it a lot for a few reasons. One, Brent Burns doesn't need to do as much in Carolina as he's been asked to do in San Jose these past few years. And I think that's going to suit him. So what I'm hoping happens for Brent Burns is like, I'm thinking of a recent example in 35-year-old Mark Giordano with Calgary in that first Gaudreau, Monahan, Lindholm explosion. Giordano was 35 years old that season. He still had talent. He had some gas in the tank, and he had a top power play role, all to ride the wave. Like, I'm not saying he helped create the wave, but he was good enough to be a part of it and ride it to a 78-point pace season. So that's the hope here for Brent Burns, is that he can do something similar, even though he's a couple of years older now. He's heading into his age 37 season than Giordano was back when he had his 78-point season. So now I'm trying to think of how I lead into the
to
wet
being a
blanket.
bummer.
Yeah,
Can
I
I
don't
also
know.
just throw it out there that you just said that the Norris winner of that season just like rode the wave? Like obviously,
Yeah, he
okay,
rode
that's
the
a
wave.
okay. I mean, I guess according to the voters, they thought he was the top
I'm
defenseman
not.
in the
They all
league.
rode. They all rode
They
each
all rode
other's
the wave.
waves. They all rode
Sure,
the wave. I'm not
that's
trying to take
fun.
anything away from Giordano personally and what he
Okay,
contributed. I
all
was
right. Let's
like,
talk about
I don't
Burns
think.
and how he sucks. Okay, let's hear it.
Well, no. So actually, one thing that's really interesting here is that Brent Burns is better defensively than Tony DeAngelo, but was not as offensive a player as DeAngelo was last year. And I wonder actually how much those two things are connected. Because Brent Burns was called on for heavy duty in San Jose, as you mentioned, Elon. Do you know that Brent Burns has now spent 7 consecutive years playing over 25 minutes a night? And Brent Burns played 26 minutes a night last year, which is 6 more minutes an evening or a matinee than Tony DeAngelo did. So I'm curious to see how much changes now that I don't think Burns is going to be called upon to be this huge defensive player, right? I think he's coming in because when Carolina was letting go of Tony DeAngelo, everyone's like, who is going to be the power play quarterback? Like, there's not anyone who we could even really imagine being so effective in the role. And so is Brent Burns being like coming in to be a power play specialist, play on the second or third pair at 5-on-5, focus more on the power play? And does that help him? Tony DeAngelo, what? You're laughing.
No, I don't know. I
Oh,
just feel
okay.
like he's not gonna. I don't know. I'm just like waiting for. I love it. This is fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think that Burns is coming in to just like play on the power play after he's like been like a stalwart of the San Jose defense like
he's
for all
been a
this
rock.
time.
He's been a rock defensively, but that's because he's had to. And I'm actually
Sure.
trying to frame this in a positive way. I think there'll be fewer 5-on-5 minutes, but I'm wondering if there's less of a load defensively. Look, Brent Burns, the last 2 years, his shot generation has gone like completely the wrong way. Basically, over the last 3 seasons, it's become half of what we wanted to expect from Brent Burns over the peak of his career. So he's so busy playing defense. I'm wondering, hey, maybe he can play a little more offense. That's the angle I'm taking here. I'm still like, there's a huge range. What I'm trying to put into words, there's a huge range of possibility here. Like DeAngelo paced for 65 points last season. Brent Burns for 54. I don't know if Brent Burns can. I think 65 points is what Brent Burns is gunning for here.
Yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic about Burns the same way. I'm actually feeling similarly about him now as I was about DeAngelo last year. It's like, hey, this isn't a slam dunk, but there's a lot of upside here and things could break right. And it's not a slam dunk for Brent Burns, a 37-year-old, to break 55 points, which is something he hasn't done since his age 33 season. Again, he's at age 34, 35, 36. It's heading into age 37, and like lots of signs of decline around. But it feels like there is going to be some good value here, like there was for DeAngelo in drafts last season, and potential for more. Put it this way: in San Jose, I'd be worried that Brent Burns next season wouldn't be able to carry the team the way he's had to be able to get his production. But in Carolina, he doesn't have that burden to shoulder. So that's probably good. But I'm still not even going to change much about what I'd project his numbers to be for next year compared to what they were this year. I'm going to stick around the 55 to 60 point range for Brent Burns, but I acknowledge there's upside for like 70.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, obviously, yeah, it's not a slam dunk, and obviously, I'm coming in very excited. I don't know. I feel good about it. I think Carolina is so awesome. I think Burns, like DeAngelo got the 65-point pace, playing less than 20 minutes a game, like you said, like basically just like mostly getting his play on the power play. He still did get a decent number of even strength points, just because Carolina scored a lot of goals. They're a good team, and I think Burns could be like a DeAngelo, but also with like some more minutes to give us some peripherals. Give us some more shots, give us some more hits, give us some more blocks. So yeah, I don't know. I think he's someone I would love to try to nab if he's falling in my various leagues. Then, of course, let's talk about Max Pacioretty, who, if he could stay healthy, this is a guy who's paced for 75 plus points in each of his past 3 seasons. He's a volume shooter, just like Burns used to be. Of course, if he stayed in Vegas, he'd be playing with Eichel and Stone probably. So I don't think I could like fairly say that his value has gone up by going to Carolina. This is more like just I'm excited for Carolina to have him. Also, there's the big question mark, right? His health. Like last year, he started, he was amazing. Then he got injured, missed a ton of time, and then when he came back, he kind of wasn't as good. But whenever that happens, I always kind of feel like, are we really just gonna, just assume he's not as good anymore? Probably he was just still recovering or wasn't 100%. So assuming he's 100%, which is obviously a huge assumption, and I will hopefully learn some more. Hopefully in training camp, even though I know that we just like joke around when people say it, I'd love to hear that he's in the best shape of his life because that would be better than what I'm assuming is that he's in the worst shape of his life, like he seemed to be over this past season. So hopefully he comes in. They say that he's looking strong. I'd imagine he's going to get good deployment. So I don't see why he shouldn't be able to continue to be a 75-ish point player with a lot of shots and be like super valuable in fantasy. What do you think about Pacioretty?
Oh no, Elon.
Oh no.
I know like these we're playing our roles to a T. It's a really great question. I think can Pacioretty keep doing what he's been doing? My optimistic answer, Elon, is I think Pacioretty could keep it up in Vegas. But in Carolina, I don't think it's automatic for Pacioretty to keep doing what he's been doing. And here's why. We've talked at length about how Pacioretty like basically reinvented himself in his second year in Vegas, right? He increased his shooting and expected goals numbers. This is setting career highs in ways that we'd never seen him do. And this was as he was in his early 30s and approaching his mid 30s. And Pacioretty had spent several years down in the dumps where he'd fallen from his previous peak with Montreal. The first year in Vegas was awful. And then he found this new gear, this new role to play. And a lot of that was based on the way he took shots. And so I looked at Pacioretty's numbers and I looked at every Canes forward's numbers from the last couple of years. And I tried to find a forward who compares to Pacioretty's offensive production, like shot generation, expected goals. And the closest one, not better, just the closest, was Andrei Svechnikov. And Svechnikov still fell below Max Pacioretty in, say, shots per 60 at 5-on-5 in the best of Svechnikov's last 3 seasons and the worst of Pacioretty's last 3 seasons. So it's still, no one in Carolina has done what Max Pacioretty has done. And I don't think that's because none of them have the talent Pacioretty has. I think it's because they play a style and system that asks them to share more of the wealth and to not be the sole shooter. It doesn't favor a player playing the way like Max Pacioretty was. And I'm going to say the same thing for time on ice. Like no one in Carolina on forward gets more than 13 minutes a night at 5-on-5. Max Pacioretty has averaged over 14 minutes a night at 5-on-5 the last 3 years. So we're looking at a 60, maybe even 70-second cut in ice time per night as a hurricane for Max Pacioretty. So no, I don't think Carolina is a place where the sky can continue to be the limit for Pacioretty and what'll be his age 34 season. To get a sense of what to expect from Pacioretty, I think I'd look back to his best Montreal numbers to sort of ballpark him in Carolina, which is a funny connection, right? Like Pacioretty was in Montreal, Carolina has so much beef, and now he's playing for Carolina. Anyway, his best Montreal numbers were high 60s, near 70 points. That's where I expect Pacioretty to land this year. I don't think this helps his fantasy value, but it does make Carolina a better team.
Yeah, okay. Well, hey, I mean, if he like, is similar to like 65, 70 points from back then, adjust for the NHL inflation of, all of a sudden he is a 75, 80 point guy because
Sure.
there's so many more goals being scored. Yeah, so it'll be fun to see. Like, I mean, they lose Vincent Trocheck, right? I didn't mention him. Like, he's gone. He was playing big minutes, so someone's gonna eat up that minutes. I'm not saying that necessarily has to be Pacioretty. If you think about it, actually, like, I was talking about in Columbus, like, who's the odd person out with Gaudreau coming in? We don't really have to play that game here in Carolina because, yeah, they got Burns and Pacioretty, but they lost Trocheck and D'Angelo, right? So I assume at least for the power play, those are the 2 players that are probably going to replace the 2 players who left. And I don't know. I guess maybe someone like a Seth Jarvis like loses a potential top power play spot he could have maybe had, or like Martin Necas continues to not look like he'll necessarily get the best role. But overall, I feel like it kind of works out pretty smoothly in Carolina. I'll be really excited to see like what lines they roll out. Like, do you think it's going to be like Aho, I don't know, Svechnikov and Pacioretty, or maybe they go Aho, Teravainen, Svechnikov, and then Pacioretty like on the next line. Yeah, it'll be fun to see. I can't wait. My eyes into training camp already.
Yeah, I feel like this could be good we know Martin Necas is like on the outs in the doghouse. Apparently, Carolina's not happy with the way he's progressing. He's hasn't been able to be the player that they've been asking him to be. But this could be good for Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who now, if he does fill in as the second line center, he could find himself as a center with two top line wingers, even on the second line in Carolina, and getting as many minutes as the top line too. And when Carolina love that, if Kotkaniemi could round into that player, I feel like he's their next project after feeling like Necas hasn't made it. But I'm sure it'll be a battle in camp to keep an eye on, because whichever centerman gets that spot, I think they could have some nice upside.
Yeah, so Cap Friendly has depth charts, which are obviously just guesses, not based on anything. But like their guess right now is Aho with Pacioretty and Seth Jarvis, and then Kotkaniemi with Svechnikov and Teravainen. So yeah, obviously good spots for both Jarvis and Kotkaniemi to potentially have some sneaky value, though the power play will be hard to get. All right, Brian, I think that we're on our way. We've covered, I don't know, 2 teams now at this point, 3 teams. So let's take a break, and we'll be back in just a sec to look at the Sharks side of losing Brent Burns, and I guess the Vegas side of losing Pacioretty. So we'll be back in just a sec to talk about all that. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Boom. All right.
So we'll go like 25.
Yeah, we'll go to 9:30.
Might be a late ad break. Like you might even you might want to consider just putting the ad in randomly earlier in the show.
Yeah. Who cares? They've never literally said anything.
I'm
just an idea.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
You know.
All right.
I'm just saying.
I appreciate. Sort of. Okay.
So no appreciation. Okay. We're friends.
Of course. I'm having a great time. Friends. Okay. And we are back. Hello, Brian. So excited to see that you're still here for us to look at the flip side. Man, but there's so many like I'm sure there's like Detroit fans listening. Like, when are you gonna get to David Perron? Or like sends, and it's like, okay, like we're gonna just take it slow because we still don't forget, like we have all summer, right? Like, so whatever we don't get to today, we'll get to it eventually. Okay, we're gonna get to all the moves. I've got them all written down, I promise. But okay, I think it's fun to really like dive into these transactions, and I want to go quickly to the Sharks. Burns leaves. I'm going to go to the Sharks just quickly because I think it could be quick and easy, right? Like, my question is this doing anything good for our guy, Erik Karlsson here? Like, he was already seeing 60% of the power play time last season, so should we just assume his role is pretty much unaffected? Like, I remember when Karlsson first went to San Jose, we spent like all summer just like debating, like, how is it going to work with like both Burns and Karlsson? Is there any, like, who's the one who gets the short end of the stick? And in the end, I don't know, they both were fine, but Karlsson just turned out not to be as good. But in terms of like power play time, anyways, and last year, Karlsson had a bit of a bounce back. He saw a lot of power play time. So are you just assuming that like nothing really changes for Erik Karlsson, or did you see this as like a significant change for him one way or the other?
Maybe a little changes for Erik Karlsson. You know, we've talked about goalies who thrive on having to shoulder the huge workload, like Hellebuck or Jari. I'm trying to think of some other names we've thrown in the past. Some goalies better when they're busy. And I wonder if what I want to think about Erik Karlsson. Of course, it's not just about what he can shoulder, it's about what he can leg and knee into ankle his way to doing. But I think there is some chance that Karlsson sees an uptick in his power play time on ice percentage. I mean, with Ottawa, he was seeing 75 to 85%, 1 year over 90% of all available power play minutes, then saw 67% of power play minutes for his first 2 years in San Jose. And then Karlsson just saw 60% of the power play minutes in the last 2 years. And I'm just wondering if this is an opportunity to bump that number up a bit, and for him to be really the only guy that is breaking out and, you know, doing hard work. And the question is, can he handle it? Can he be that player again? And I don't think he could ever be quite as good as he once was, but he was playing 23 and a half minutes a night last season. Brent Burns is gone. That's 26 minutes a night up for grabs. I assume he'll get a couple of those, and I assume that'll help him. So I think as long as Karlsson's body can hold up, I think this will be moderately helpful for Karlsson, who's paced for 55, 60 points in 2 of his last 3 seasons. In fact, he really, like, if you adjust your expectations and say Karlsson is a 60-point player, it took us a while to wrap our heads around that, but you would have only been disappointed once in the last ever that Karlsson didn't hit that mark. So
well, except for the injuries, those were disappointing.
Right, of course. Like, he misses 30 games a year for the last
that
4
kind of
seasons.
sucks.
Yeah, so if he can stay healthy, I would count on him for 60 next year, and maybe a slight uptick in power play points. Maybe he'll take a couple more shots too. I'm hoping that Karlsson can play more than 55 games this year, because he hasn't really since becoming a San Jose Shark.
Yeah, and if the Sharks want to have any chance to do anything, I think they're going to need him to play more games. Go Hollywood here in the chat is asking, with Burns gone, I'm interested who is the fifth player on the top power play. So Hurdle, Meyer, Couture, Karlsson, and I mean, the fun answer is Eklund. Like if Eklund makes a team out of camp, he was on the top power play, if I recall correctly, at the start of last year for his like 9-game stint. So I think that's the fun answer. Or it could be like a boring guy, like a Barabanov, I don't know,
LeBanc.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
like, I'm hoping one day it'll be Eklund. Like it's like he's going to be a star. I think it's just like I don't know if it's next year.
Yeah. I'm trying to like say this is also that they can barely fill a top power play makes me think that they're going to use that top power play more than 60% of the time. But I guess they didn't really have much of a second power play unit either last year in San Jose. So I don't know if my optimism is ill-founded for trying to figure out. Also, San Jose, am I right that they don't have a coach yet?
I don't. Okay, I'll be able to answer. I probably, if I was a really good podcaster, I would like pause, and edit and then make it sound smart. They have Bob Budner. Is he no longer the coach?
He's no longer the coach. Like they very suddenly like.
Oh right,
house.
like late, and then everyone was upset. Oh yeah.
It's like, why did you like? What changed in all the nothing that's happened?
Well, they got a new GM.
They
got Mike Greer to be the GM, and I guess he decided to make a change.
But that was part of the house cleaning too, I think, that led to the GM being anyway. So so we'll see who Mike Greer, who's a former NHLer, Mike Greer.
I think we talked about him on the podcast, like in year 1 or 2 of the pod. He was like having a bit of like some fantasy relevance right at the end there. I definitely have memories of talking about Mike. You look up Mike Greer's career stats. I'll mention, I don't know, just like because we have so much time. I'll mention some other. I'm wrong.
Unfortunately, yeah, he finished his career with Buffalo in the 2 years before we started the show.
Really?
Or 1 year before we started the show, with 16 points in 73 games.
I guess I'm having Berenstein Bears situation in my reality. It happened.
It's the Mandela effect.
Yeah. Okay, so I probably we're not going to talk about how the Sharks got Luke Kunin, Oscar Lindblom, Nico Sturm. Yeah, so you're right, Brian. I don't know if they have too many exciting players that can, get a lot of power play time. I guess like if we really wanted to just go into deep Sharks talk, we could talk about this could be an opportunity for Ryan Merkley, who's like this defenseman who they drafted in the first round a couple years back, and like he's been kind of a disappointment. Like this would be his opportunity to kind of take over on like power play 2, maybe start doing something. But in our talk with Sheng Peng earlier, he didn't seem too high on Merkley, so I won't be either. And let's move on now to Vegas, who, by the way, our good friend Ben Burnett is going to be doing a deep dive into with another beat writer interview later this week with Jesse Granger that's currently on the books. So I'm excited to hear what their conversation gets, and we'll see if it's any different from our conversation we're going to have right now, because now that they had to give Pacioretty away to clear cap space, I'm starting to wonder, Brian, about this Jack Eichel trade. There was an interesting tweet that was shared in our Discord from Sinbin Vegas, kind of summarizing that. So at this point, it's Eichel was traded for Tuck, Krebs, Dodonov, because they had to give him away also because they couldn't fit him in, a first, Dylan Coughlin, and now Pacioretty. It's starting to look like a lot of pieces had to go in order for them to acquire Jack Eichel. Do you think, Brian, and by the way, Ben, if you're listening, please ask this exact same question to Jesse. Do you think Vegas would reconsider if they had the option to make a do-over and maybe not acquire Eichel? Like, was it worth it to send all these guys and lose Pacioretty for nothing just to get Jack Eichel?
I really wonder if they had done the math to realize that they were going to lose, like that they could not fit everyone in under the cap. Like they had to not know, right? This has to be a mistake, because would they have made, I don't know, Elon. To me, it seems very strange. Like Vegas has been a team that has struggled to manage the cap. Like they're constantly missing a roster player or keeping a player on long-term IR, like doing all kinds of things to just get by and squeeze by the cap. And that's because they've been so aggressive, right? Which has been fun to see. The Golden Knights look like geniuses out of the expansion gate. They got some good fortune with how some guys performed in year 1. Remember those career high performances from William Karlsson, Eric Howla, James Neal. But then when we were like, yeah, well, it's not going to last a year 2, Vegas was like, wait a minute. And they just went out and kept getting all the good players to shore up any regression that would have been expected from the guys who had overperformed early on. But like, it was fun and awesome. But now Vegas is paying the price. I'm really curious. Ben, please ask Jesse the question. I'd like to hear Jesse's answer on this, because he'd know if someone in the org had the foresight at the moment to realize that they couldn't make this all work, or if they had another plan that fell through. And then looking at what's left in Vegas, where all their money's committed, you have Mark Stone with back problems. Jack Eichel looks okay, but he's coming off the neck stuff. Max Pacioretty himself, he had wrist stuff. Lehner had neck and shoulder problems. I don't know. I'm pretty worried about this roster, and it's suddenly a pretty bare bones roster beyond the top line without Pacioretty. So I can't imagine that Vegas planned this any more than they planned to get to the Cup final in the first year, which is to say, I think a lot has broken badly. I think they might have been able to plan with a little more foresight, but I'm going to leave that to the expert, Jesse Granger, in the 32 Beats interview, which I will be eagerly listening to.
Yeah, Julian is pointing out in the chat here, they did just extend Riley Smith $5 million a year, so maybe they could have like kept Pacioretty and let Riley Smith walk. I get the thing is like you said, Brian, like maybe they're just excited to have the opportunity to get away from Pacioretty because of all the health issues he's had, right? So maybe they just did last year. Everything kind of blew up because everyone got injured, so maybe they just decided they don't want to have this much risk. I don't know. So yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation. But yeah, it does seem like this top six now pretty set, right? Like assuming, let's say they stick with their classic Marchessault, Karlsson, Smith, and then you'll have like Eichel with Stone and probably like a Chandler Stevenson. Shut up. Chandler Stevenson. Are either of an Eichel or a Mark Stone less appealing to you with Pacioretty gone, or are these guys just like good enough that assuming they're healthy, they'll make things happen with whoever they're playing with? It's not as if like losing Pacioretty is like a huge deal for them because they're superstars in their own right.
They're superstars in their own right. And I think assuming they're healthy is a really big part of that. And I might knock them down just a couple spots on draft day because of concerns for their health versus thinking that they are fully healthy, because I'm not sure either one has proven that they are. It could be rough. I'm going to put it out there. I don't think it's likely, but it could be rough for Chandler Stevenson, right? He finished the year playing with Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty. And now with just Stone there, like, does Eichel center Mark Stone and Stevenson is not the winger there? Because I think it's been a long time since Chandler Stevenson has played winger. So he's someone I'd be concerned about.
Yeah, well, I mean, the good thing for him is that there's not too much competition right now for top six wingers over in Vegas. I don't think Nolan Patrick is working out. I don't know if who else, like literally who else I'm wondering to play in that top six right now. Like throw a name, Nicholas Roy.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think this is also tough news for Robin Lehner, assuming he's healthy. This is not going to be they were a very hard team to play behind last year. I don't think it's going to be any better this year with less run support available. It's not like Pacioretty is being replaced with anyone, although he was pretty ineffective for long stretches of last year because of his injury troubles. And I'd be worried about Robin Lehner. I think we had a conversation. Someone was trying to, in our Discord server, where I think it was Mason was trying to decide between keeping Robin Lehner and Connor Hellebuck. And like you said, well, Brian really loves Lehner, so he might disagree, but you said Hellebuck. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I do agree in this case, because I'm not sure Vegas, and wins are important. I'm not sure Vegas is so much better than Winnipeg. And also Lehner's health is a huge question mark that I wouldn't want Hellebuck over Lehner.
No, you mean you wouldn't want Lehner over Hellebuck?
No, I want Hellebuck.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Okay. Well, I thought you said... Anyway, whatever. I think you might... Anyways, people get what you mean. Okay. Yeah, I think to be fair, I think Mason was like deciding between like keepers, and like those were two goalies on the list. And I said like definitely keep Hellebuck and I wouldn't keep Lehner. I don't think he was like asking Hellebuck versus Lehner. I'd assume Mason also would agree that that's like an obvious choice. To me at this point, like as much as Hellebuck has struggled a little bit, yeah, Robin Lehner, I was already concerned even if they had Pacioretty, right? Like he just not a starting goalie in the league that you can rely on to play like a full season, in my opinion, which is something we've discussed a lot.
Yeah, the question was also framed largely around wins, which historically we'd say, yeah, Vegas is going to win more than Winnipeg. But yeah, as we've detailed over the last couple of minutes, not so confident.
Not looking good. Yeah, who knows? Maybe Jesse Granger will disagree and be like, Vegas is going to win the cup next year. Weren't we like a little bit concerned about what Washington was doing? They lost Burakovsky for nothing like the year before they won the cup, and we were like, what is this team doing? And then it turned out to be just fine. So who
And we
knows?
were not believers in Vegas the first time around, and they didn't have Eichel and Stone on their roster then. So who knows?
All right, so we were way back talking about Carolina and how they got Burns and Pacioretty, and I did mention that they let Tony DeAngelo go. He goes to Philly, where he signed a 2-year deal, $5 million per year. Like we discussed already, DeAngelo's coming off a season that matched his 2019-20 breakout with the Rangers. He put up 51 points in 64 games, so that's a 65-point pace with the Hurricanes. In my chat with Charlie O'Connor, like a month ago, he's a beat writer for Philly, he said that like when I was talking about Ryan Ellis and being like, is he going to be ready? He said, watch what Philly does in the offseason. If they go after like another big name defenseman, that's probably a sign that they're not so confident in Ryan Ellis's health. So here we go. They've got Tony DeAngelo, which makes me pretty concerned that Ryan Ellis is not going to be ready, right? So they had to make other arrangements. And if that's the case, I'm going to assume, so Brian, obviously I'm ready for you to correct me, that DeAngelo's probably the front runner to run the top power play on Philly. Like Ivan Provorov just doesn't seem to have worked out there. Cam York is only 21. Like obviously like Cam York is a threat. Like at some point they're hoping that he takes over on the top power play, but maybe they have DeAngelo for these 2 years and then like Cam York comes in after that. Though, of course, we're talking about the top power play on Philly, not the top power play on Carolina. So it definitely feels like still a downgrade regardless for DeAngelo. This is not only the Flyers. This is a Flyers team without Claude Giroux, right? This used to be a pretty strong power play when they had Giroux and Couturier. I guess Couturier will be back. We'll see if he's 100%. I'm going to assume that you're going to predict a downtick for DeAngelo, and I'm going to go ahead and agree with you in advance. You haven't been like over the moon about anyone we've talked about yet, so I can't imagine you're going to be over the moon about DeAngelo landing in Philly.
Phew. I'm glad we're on the same page and that you're not building up. I think one X factor here with Tony DeAngelo moving, and it's interesting because I listened to the Charlie O'Connor interview also, and they did go out and get that defenseman. They made that splash. But to me, Tony DeAngelo is not a replacement for Ryan Ellis. So I still, like, I guess it depends on how management, like the organization in Philadelphia, sees Tony DeAngelo. But to me,
but also to be fair, like who, like I agree with you, and I'm sure they agree with you. But also, it's like who's available.
Yeah. So it's a strange move in that I don't think it addresses a need because there's no one in Philadelphia to run the power play, and rumor had it they were looking to move Provorov too, and they've lost all faith in him. I've lost faith in all of Philadelphia. And I worry also that it's not going to be the best place for Tony DeAngelo. I feel like New York was pretty hard for DeAngelo to handle. We saw what happened with him. He ended up being benched and not in the league. And I can't imagine Philadelphia is going to be any easier than Philadelphia. So we'll find out now if DeAngelo has figured out how to like be a professional hockey player in a big city, or if he was sort of sheltered and coached and protected from that in Carolina by management or the locker room or whatever worked last year in Carolina. We'll see if those lessons transfer with DeAngelo to Philadelphia or stay in Carolina, because it's going to be rough this year in Philly. Like they're a bad team. They have maybe two bona fide top power play unit forwards. And that power play unit in Philly last year converted at just 13%, unbelievably bad. And of course, some misfortune involved there. But I feel like Tony DeAngelo isn't going to come in and fix that. See how much he can do, but there's going to be a lot going wrong in Philly, and DeAngelo is the big offseason acquisition. I don't know. I just see the potential for like fireworks here and things. I just don't like the way things are aligning here. So I'm going to stay pretty far away from DeAngelo in drafts this season. Of course, those who take the risk could find themselves rewarded. But even if you're hoping for, maybe DeAngelo can get 60 points in Philadelphia, that's a downgrade from Carolina. Well, consider that the leading scorer in Philadelphia last season had 52 points. Claude Giroux had a 60-point pace over 57 games, but still, if that's what you're hoping for from Tony DeAngelo, decrease your expectations. You're looking at, I would hope for 50 points, and I'm not even going to set my watch to that. I'd be very worried about Tony DeAngelo this season.
I mean, Now you're like going so low that I have to even like maybe at least argue the other side a little bit just to say like I'm not too worried about like whatever the big city stuff. Like I get what you're saying, but I don't know. It seems like that stuff's behind him, so I'm gonna assume that that'll be fine. So we'll wait and see on that. And if he's running the top power play, I'm not like I think that he's got that gives him a pretty safe floor. Like I think if you draft him as a 50-point guy, I don't think you're going to be too disappointed. I just don't think he's going to like reach the heights that he did last year on like a much stronger team. But I think he's a solid bet to be a 50-point guy. Like if he's falling around that, like even 55, like I think that's a pretty good guy to draft and not someone that I'd be too concerned about. Unless like the big concern to me would be like Cam York just like destroying in training camp and like all of a sudden taking over on the top power play, which you'd think like why would they sign D'Angelo just for that to happen? But you know, Philly like had Shane Gostisbehere come out of nowhere and take over the top power play one season. So you know anything could happen. Any response to any of that, or should I just keep going?
I
Wait,
think
you're
you can
muted.
keep.
Okay,
Sorry.
I'll keep going. Okay,
I
I'll
think
keep
you
going.
keep going and you can close it. Why don't we?
We'll do one more team and then close it, or do you want to close it now?
I think let's close it now.
All
This
right,
is when
sure.
you planned on it,
All
right?
right, sounds
Make
good.
it.
Okay.
Now's a great time.
Okay, so with that, Brian, let's try something different here. We've been chatting for an hour. I feel like maybe the listeners need a break. You and I can maybe grab a drink of water. I don't know. So I learned this from another podcast here on the Blue Wire Network, the PDO cast. Recently, they like split up a long episode into part one and part two. So let's do the same. You know, we've all stretch our arms, and you and I are going to take a break, and then we're going to come back for part two. We're going to go for another hour, trying to cover as much as we can. I know Shams is here in the chat waiting for the wings. I've got like 5 or 6 teams, I think, still to go through before we get to the wings. We might hit them, we might not. That's the big like mystery for part two. So yeah, check your podcast feed. I'm gonna try to drop that episode right after this one. So yeah, just thanks everyone for listening. Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess this is the end of an episode though. We're trying something new here. It's the first time I've done it, so we're gonna end the episode, which means I'm gonna thank everyone for listening. Like I said, if you could give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we're gonna do something for that again, Brian. We're gonna have some prize. I think we have like some Dauber guides to give away. You and I need to talk off air and come up with something to try to get people to give us some 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate that. Oh, now that I said that, no one's gonna give it to us now because they're gonna wait for us to offer a prize. But yeah, just show how cool you are now. If you give us a 5-star review now, then you prove that you're a super fan and you don't just do it for the prizes.
We will retroactively include anybody. It's July 18th that we're recording this. Anybody who leaves a written 5-star review, like you have to write a little note with it, and you will be automatically entered. So long as you're listening to hear yourself win, we'll count you. So don't
Okay.
delay. Or
Help us
actually, you
out.
know what? It could be better for us, Elon, strategically, if we wait like a few weeks to really
Maybe.
get the momentum going. So hold on. If you're not sure, you know what? We'll leave it to you, dear listener. But
Do what you want to do.
We're gonna push harder in a few weeks. You can decide when you want to be pushed.
Yeah. Also, thanks so much to the patrons for keeping Karlsson the lifeblood of the podcast. Okay. And not only because of the financial support, which we very much appreciate, but also just the great community on Discord. All the chats during the whole frenzy of last week were just so fun. And like Brian said, you could just like jump in at any time and like just join in on the latest discussion. It was a blast. We have a really cool crew. If you're not a patron, you still have the opportunity to take advantage of our summer promotion coming for just $1. Check out the community. We're having a lot of fun. We're voting on players every day. We're going to just start announcing the couple rules for next season once we finalize those. So check it out, keepingkarlsson.com/patron. But with that, Brian, let's wrap up part one of this mega show. So let's cue the outro music. Do you have any credits you want to read? Do we still do credits for a part one?
Yeah, I
Do
think.
it.
Oh no, we don't.
No
This
credits.
is the first time we're doing it. We'll save the credits for the end.
All right, the outro music is playing. Let's at least, though, of course, leave people with a plea in case they have some time before they listen to part two. Brian, while people wait to hear our takes on all the moves the Senators made, that's where we're going to start part two. What should they do?
Please continue doing all that you can to make sure that fantasy hockey is for everyone.
All right. All right, do you want to take a break or do you want to just get going?
Let's get going. So like for part two, where it's going to be like a quick entry, right?
What do you mean?
Like, don't like repeat the whole shtick.
No yelling yes?
I mean, you could do like I guess
Maybe I could have a new part two intro. Maybe we could try something new here.
I'm just saying, like, I don't, yeah. I guess you could throw it to me because I've been looking up. I have something to say.
Okay.
I could say things.
I'll try a new intro. Let's do it. Let's see how it goes.
Okay.
It's part 2, baby. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who are very excited to... Okay, I don't know what I'm doing here. I should have probably thought before I started talking. Okay.
You could just do like a yes, welcome to part 2 of our UFA extravaganza.
All right, fine. Okay. Yes! Part 2, baby! Welcome, everybody, to another installment of our UFA extravaganza. Hopefully, you've listened to all of our thoughts on Gaudreau and on the Pacioretty and Brent Burns and all the excitement from last week that we covered just one episode ago. Here we are to continue discussing all of the NHL free agents and trades from the past week. And with me, I'm Elon Dubrovsky, and with me once again to break it all down, your good friend and mine, Brian Comm. Welcome back, Brian.
Thanks, Elon. It's great to be back in the exact same place where we finished part 1. About to move on to the next place, which you mentioned is Ottawa. But just a quick thought is that, on the last episode for part 1, we were talking so much about how it's kind of a downer and or I was being a downer and that I'm not expecting anybody to really improve their fantasy value of any of the players we've talked about so far. And I was like, okay, is this unique to this year? So I've sort of been scrolling through free agents signed in past years being like, is there something I'm missing here? Do a lot of people who change teams, and we know it's a bit of a flag when a player is playing in a new team, new system, new coach, new teammates, all of that can throw a player off. And so who have been the exceptions, and can we learn anything from this? And I'm looking at the 2021 UFA class, and I'm seeing a lot of players. And I think the one player who really benefited was Zach Hyman. I think there's one of many.
But
UFAs.
even Zach Hyman, had a really great year in Toronto the year before. Yeah. Did he really do that much better in last year than the year before? I think he kind of stayed the same for the most part.
I'm gonna bring up his numbers now. He actually paced for fewer points, but he had a bigger power play role, which is what I was thinking of. So he played really well at 5-on-5 in Toronto. So his fortunes didn't substantially increase, but he was the best one that I could come up with. And then looking at the 2020 class, there's still a lot of guys. It's just a lot of guys who I'm not sure anyone who changed teams actually got better. Some of the bigger names in 2020, Torrey Krug, Tyler Toffoli, Evgeny Dodonov, who went to Ottawa for what it's worth. Cam Talbot went to Minnesota. Oh, the times have changed.
Taylor Hall. That was huge when he went to Buffalo to play with Eichel. That worked out so well.
And we thought at the time, we were excited. We were ready to be excited, but we keep learning time and time again. And I think maybe, Elon, while we're talking, and not to spoil the rest of this episode, because we're still going to look to find the player that could thrive, and also all the fantasy impacts around the player who's been moved. But this is maybe just a note. It's okay, signed a UFA contract last season. I'm going to temper my expectations because it's really rare. I'm not going to expect anything new and exciting and extravagant to happen. At best, they'll keep up what they were doing with their old team. At worst, things could go horribly wrong.
In 2019, Artemi Panarin signed with the Rangers. That worked out pretty well. That was a good one.
That did work out really well.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah, so something to keep in mind. Well, also, these are usually players. The biggest name players are players entering their 30s, like Johnny Gaudreau as well, 29. So it's usually that's players coming off their peak. Now they're cashing in. And yeah, you expect a bit of a decline. So I think, we already agreed, right? Gaudreau's not going to be as good probably as he was last year. We'll see how the players around him do. But okay, so with that in mind, let's go to the next big UFA signing, which is over in Ottawa. We were just talking about Philly and about how they got DeAngelo. Of course, getting DeAngelo doesn't even come close to replacing the impact that Claude Giroux has had on this team for the past, decade plus. And so Giroux obviously was already gone. He went to Florida at the trade deadline, and he did really well on the Panthers. Now he comes to the Ottawa Senators, who've had such an insanely busy offseason. Pierre Dorion, just delighting fans all over Sens Nation. Everyone I talk to is just I love Dorion. He's the best. We already talked about them acquiring Alex DeBrincat on our impromptu show when you visited me a couple weekends ago. But since then, that was just not. That was just the start. Since then, I'll tell you all the moves Ottawa's made. They traded Matt Murray to Toronto with a third, and they retained 25% of his contracts. They got him off the books, and then they traded their other goalie, Philip Gustafsson, to get Cam Talbot in. So that cements a Talbot and Anton Forsberg tandem. So we'll definitely talk about that. Then they signed Claude Giroux, 3 years, 19.5 mil, which I think is pretty good, right? It's like not one of these crazy long-term, UFA contracts that's going to be on the books forever. 3 years, okay, I like it. They traded Connor Brown to Washington for a 2024 second, which is kind of like, I thought Connor Brown is good, but also Ottawa's got such a stacked top six that, like, I don't know, maybe they don't need to pay him as a bottom sixer. And then they also extended Josh Norris, 8 years at 63.6 mil total. So of course we've got lots to cover here. But I guess let's start with Giroux, right? He now completes a very scary top six. We got Tkachuk, Batherson, Norris, Stützle, DeBrincat, and now Claude Giroux. Like, I have no idea how these lines will shake out, but I feel like you can't go wrong with these six players. Giroux had 42 points in 57 games while he was on Philly last season. Then he took it up a notch, 23 points in 18 games in Florida, playing primarily with Bennett and Huberdeau, which are good line mates. Huberdeau's amazing. He's probably better than all these people in Ottawa, but it's not like such a huge downgrade, I don't think, with the two guys he's going to be playing with in Ottawa. When you look at his season overall, he had a 70-point pace, including 23 power play points. While the signing is obviously exciting for the Sens, Brian, is this good news or bad news for the 34-year-old Claude Giroux? Like, I feel like on one hand, he's going to play with great players. On the other, is there like enough power play time and ice to go around? Though on the other, he's Claude Giroux. Of course, he's going to be on the top power play, but who's he bumping? On another hand, Florida had a lot of talented players around. He still seemed to do really well, so maybe it doesn't matter how many great players they are. So what do you think, Brian? Plus or minus on the 70 points for next, or not plus or minus. So what do you think, Brian? Over under that 70-point pace from last season. What's he going to do next year?
I'm going to easily take the under, Elon, and not to be a total wet blanket here, but I think you're hitting
surprising.
The nail on the head. That power play deployment is going to be huge for Giroux. One of the reasons he had a 70-point pace last season was because he got to Florida after having 9 power play points in 57 games as a Flyer. He got to Florida and put up the same amount of power play points, 9, in just 18 games. So he had a power play point every other game in Florida on average. And that's obviously not going to quite hold in Ottawa. In fact, I hope, like I said, this is a huge part of Giroux's game. It always has been. In the few years recently, he has been downgraded in power play time on ice, but has still managed 20-25 power play point paces to help fuel him to about a 65-70 point pace overall. But if Giroux lands on a second power play unit or even a like power play 1B, that means he could lose 10 to 15 power play points, which with very simple math puts him down to a 55-ish point pace, which is very far from the 70 you're setting the over-under at. I think the over-under would be better set at like 60, 65. I think that would be a closer one. I think an even better one, if I'm going to allow myself to be a fully wet blanket, would be 62 and a half. Something around there would be the right over-under for Claude Giroux in his age 34 season. The good news about Giroux is he is still very good. Like, he's been very consistent for the better part of the last many years. That's really positive. He's not declining. He's not falling off. He's been a really good hockey player and isn't showing any sign of like a huge slowdown, which is great. That's what you want to see as the players entering their age 34 season. But this is really just going to come down to power play deployment. I think Giroux can get 60 points. I think he can have a good year, but whether or not you're really happy with him on your team was going to completely depend on how much power play time Giroux gets.
Well, if Giroux's so awesome on the power play and Ottawa just signed him, like, why won't they just put him on the power play? Like, I know that he's going to a team with like lots of good players, but that was the same situation in Florida, right? That was also a team with a ton of good players, and they still found a way to fit Giroux in there. So I don't know, Brian. I think that I could see him hitting 70 and maybe more. Like, I think he's an awesome player. He's in a great situation. I see this as being a lot more like the Florida situation than like the Phillies situation, and he did great on Florida. Yeah, maybe he like produced a little bit higher than he should have. Like you said, like a power play point every game, but also he was like well above a 70-point pace in Florida. He was like at a 100-point pace in Florida. So I don't know. I think I'm happy with my 70. I don't know if I'm going over 70, but I think right around there. I think it's going to be great. I think he's going to be really good.
I really hope so. I would love for you to be right. I just if the power play minutes are there, Elon, then I think he can get there. So I love your optimism that they're going to be there all season long. I agree. One of the reasons you bring in Claude Giroux is to be on your top power play, but like the obvious question is, who does he displace? Like Kachuk is, I think, a lock on the top unit, along with Norris and DeBrincat. And so if you have Giroux ahead of Batherson and Stutzla, which you very well could, then he's on the top unit. Or Ottawa splits them into two 1A, 1B units, and that hurts Giroux's numbers overall. Yeah. Like there's just a lot. There's more ways this could go wrong than right. And so that's why I'm feeling apprehensive.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a risk, and maybe we'll learn more in training camp. But yeah, I think I would probably expect Giroux to get power play priority over like Batherson and Stutzla, like you said. But of course, we'll have to wait and see. In general, then, like, I mean, I don't really want to go back. We already in our last episode talked about like all the other 5 guys in that top 6. So unless, Brian, you have any like big changes in your thoughts on them now that Giroux comes in, I will point out one big loser to Ottawa, like bringing in all these guys. Remember at the end of last season how Matthew Joseph got acquired from Tampa Bay and was like on the top line, like producing pretty well. Like obviously that's over. Like I don't think he was supposed to be like a top line player. Like if Ottawa wants to actually be a contending team, you don't want Matthew Joseph on your top line. But yeah, he's someone that maybe would have been a good late pick based on what he did last year, but now obviously an afterthought. But nice for the Sens to have players. They're silly to have some players in the bottom 6, right? And then over in net, okay, so we now are looking at Cam Talbot and we're looking at Anton Forsberg. And I was calling Forsberg my like sleeper goalie pick for next season. I was super excited for him after Ottawa, got to DeBrincat. That's of course completely out the window now. Like forget everything I said about Anton Forsberg because Talbot's coming off a solid season in Minnesota where he put up a 9-11 save percentage in 49 games, which was, by the way, a tier down from what Forsberg did. Forsberg had a 9-17 save percentage, but still, like I find it hard to believe that Forsberg's going to get more starts than Talbot next year. I think at best for him, it's like 50-50. To me, this looks like a 1A, 1B situation with Talbot as the 1A, and then like maybe obviously Forsberg could have the opportunity to like usurp him. But yeah, I'll forget all of my Forsberg. Like I'm happy for the Sens to have 2 like solid goalies, but forget everything I said about Anton Forsberg being a valuable piece in fantasy next year. I don't even think I would draft him.
This hurts Forsberg for sure. I think the one reason to remain optimistic about Forsberg is that in the last 3 years, he's outplayed Cam Talbot. And it's not to say Forsberg has been amazing. He was great last year, but overall, in about half the time that Talbot's played, Forsberg has basically matched his expected Fenwick save percentage, whereas Cam Talbot has fallen 5 points short of it. So basically a 945 goalie Fenwick save percentage versus a 950 Fenwick save percentage that would have been expected from an average goalie. So Talbot, again, he's played twice as many games as Forsberg. Heavier workload might have impacted his ability to perform, but I really think that Forsberg could emerge as the 1A here, or even number 1. You know how I don't have a lot of faith in Cam Talbot. And the last goalie in Minnesota that was well protected there that I didn't have a lot of faith in was Devin Dubnyk, right? Year after year, I was like, this guy gets such great protection from his team, covers up a lot of his flaws, put him behind any other team, and I think he's going to struggle. And he did. Now, Talbot hasn't been as bad as I saw Dubnyk appearing in Minnesota, but I think he might be in for a bit of a surprise as he heads to Ottawa, while Forsberg is familiar with the workload and work that's going to be asked of him. So I would still, if I'm drafting, it's funny. Like I think Ottawa is going to want both guys to succeed. I think there's reasons for them to want Talbot. They traded for him. They're paying him more, but they also want Forsberg, who's someone they made a small bet on and are actually going to hang on to. I don't know if you remember, but at the trade deadline last year, Forsberg, one of the only reasons Ottawa was said to have Forsberg on the roster was to flip him. And they had the opportunity to flip him and they held him. And I think that says something about where they think he could play. And they also just sent away Philip Gustafsson, who was their closest goalie prospect to playing in the NHL, which I think is another vote of confidence in what they've seen from Anton Forsberg. Whether they're right or wrong, not sure, but there's still reasons to believe that Forsberg could be the number 1 in Ottawa, even with Cam Talbot around. But Elon, I agree that it does take a big bite out of his fantasy value. Someone who could have been a volume starter on a team that might rack up a bunch of wins.
Yeah, like maybe Forsberg is better, but I don't think he's like better enough to be like a volume starter now. Like clearly, like Talbot's gonna play some games. So yeah, like I mean, we talked about this on the last Patreon cast, I believe. Like just or maybe it was on our last show we did. Like the NHL is just having more and more tandems. Like throw Ottawa on the list, another team with a tandem. Like and so like that's gonna make our like sure volume starters for next year all the more valuable. I thought Forsberg would have been like a sneaky volume guy that maybe wouldn't be on people's radars. Now I think Ottawa like yeah, I'm not so excited about drafting Talbot either, right? Like I think I would. He's not someone I would leave undrafted because I think he'll like start game one. But yeah, like neither of them are people that are going to be ranking too high in Schmore goalies board. We're going to probably have our, usually in Schmore goalies board when we're making our goalie tiers, we usually have like good tandems and then kind of bad tandems are like two separate tiers. And I feel like both of those tiers are going to have like half the goalies in the league because, like speaking of which, let's follow Matt Murray to Toronto where it looks like he's going to be in a tandem himself for as long as he can be healthy. Or I don't know. Obviously, he's hoping that he can, finally become a starter again. But Murray had that one great 1 month run last year, starting around late January, where he was lights out for it was only 6 straight games, a glorious 6 straight games where he did so well. But yeah, overall, he only played 20 games on the season, and even with that great run, he only managed a 906 save percentage in those 20 games. That just goes to show how badly he played in those other 14 games. So he'll be joined in my hometown in Toronto by Ilya Samsonov, another like high, like these are like 5 years ago. If you told me that Toronto would have Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov, I'd be like, what? Like the two top like goalie prospects. But anyway, Samsonov, former 22nd overall pick by Washington, really pooped the bed last year. 896 save percentage in 44 games. This like Washington had Vanacek and they left him unprotected, and like, he got taken by Seattle, and then they like got him back, and then Vanacek ended up like taking over for Samsonov because Samsonov couldn't cement the job, which clearly Washington was ready to give him if he had been ready. So now the Leafs get a reclamation project here. They get him for only 1 year, 1.8 million, so not a big risk. The big risk to Toronto is that they only have 2 years. Brian, did you realize this? It's in 2 years from now, Austin Matthews will become a UFA. Like this window with Matthews has 2 seasons left, and now they're putting their fate for the potential remainder of this window in these two goalies who both have like high pedigrees, could be good, but haven't given us any recent reason for confidence that they could be relied upon. Like both of them couldn't totally just go belly up this season, and Toronto would be in a lot of trouble. It's a scary situation for Leafs fans. But hey, on the plus side, I thought Carolina was taking a huge risk last year. I thought Carolina was taking a huge risk last year with Anderson and Ranta as their tandem, and that worked out just fine. So, Brian, first of all, what do you think of Dubas's gamble here? And then, of course, for fantasy purposes, any educated guess for who, if either of these guys, will be worth targeting in fantasy drafts next season between Murray and Samsonov?
I feel I'm trying, Elon, to say you should like it's hard because you want to target the Toronto goalie, but both of them might not be like it could be an Ottawa situation. I'm trying to read the situation here, Elon, and I can't be that optimistic. I feel it's going to be very similar to both what we saw in Ottawa last year with Matt Murray and what we saw with Ilya Samsonov last year in Washington. I don't know that either are going to turn over a new leaf. I'm interested in what the Leafs are trying to do in grabbing these reclamation projects, but that is exactly what they are. And to pretend otherwise would be misguided. Ilya Samsonov, he's been similar to Cam Talbot the last 3 years, which is to say, not great. He's underperforming his expected Fenwick save percentage, so not as good as what you'd expect an average NHL goalie to do, which is a bummer. But the pedigree is still there, and maybe, I don't know who the Leafs goaltending coach is actually. Maybe that person is the X factor in all this. They're going to coach these goalies into the players that they were always supposed to become. So Samsonov, comparable to Cam Talbot. Matt Murray, comparable to someone even worse. Matt Murray's expected Fenwick save percentage at 5-on-5 the last 3 years, 941. His actual mark, 931. And that's really bad to fall 10 points short of your expected save percentage. Like that's very, very bad territory. So the Leafs have their work cut out for them. I like that they're rolling the dice. They kind of didn't have any other option. Like I'm looking at the 2022 UFA goalies. I mean, Kemper and Campbell were too expensive. And then the rest of the crew, Martin Jones, Eric Comrie, Yarrow Halak, Kevin Lankinen.
Husso was out there, but he went for a lot of money also.
Oh, right. You're right. So sorry. He's in the too expensive category. I will say, and there's no point in me really saying this, but there are two goalies out there who I would have been interested to see the Leafs roll the dice on, and those are Charlie Lindgren and Alex Lyon, who've both
Come on.
yeah, I know. It's insane because there's no point in me saying any of this because Alex Lyon isn't even going to be an NHLer next year, and Charlie Lindgren is backing up Darcy Kemper, who's going to be a workhorse in Washington.
Okay, let me be clear. I was
can't be
laughing
proven
about
right about this.
I
Okay.
was laughing about Alex Lyon. I'm actually also a little bit into Charlie Lindgren, and we'll talk about him when we get to the Cavs. But Alex Lyon, that I did not expect you to say that name. I thought maybe you'd say like Kevin Lankinen or something. I didn't expect Alex Lyon to come out of your mouth.
In very limited, we've talked about him on the show, in very limited time in the NHL, has looked good. He's looked good. He's just never been given an extended look, which really stinks. And I want him to get that look. He's not going to get it.
It's going to be Murray it's going to be Murray and Samsonov.
So where does this all come down for Murray and Samsonov's fantasy value? I don't know, Elon. I'm going to ask you, actually. How would you rank Murray, Samsonov, Forsberg, and Talbot? And you're allowed to say it's a wash. Like they're all the same, but I'm curious to know if you have any slightly above the others.
Okay, no, I'll do a ranking. Okay, this is the way I play fantasy. Like I like to take some risks with my goalies. I'm like the Leafs, actually. Like what Dubas did, I don't know if I would do it if I was the GM of the Leafs, just because like that's a really big risk to take and they could end up with nothing. But in fantasy, unlike in the NHL, there's usually some random goalie that shows up in UFA where you can like maybe, or I'm saying UFA, you're in free agency. You guys know how fantasy hockey works, right? So even if you don't draft an amazing goalie, maybe you have another opportunity. Like Anton Forsberg last year was someone that was available in free agency all over, and he ended up being like an MVP for me in the cupful. So the way I would play is I would definitely draft Matt Murray first of the four of them, because while you're right, Brian, that his Fenwick's like everything terrible, right? He's been brutal. I think he's a goalie that clearly is like has the skills, like he has the raw skills, and it's more like I think he's a head game. And I think what you said was very apt about how this all comes down to the Toronto goalie coach, like being able, and also Murray's health. So Toronto's trainer and goalie coach, hopefully they get the best of the best to get Matt Murray in shape, to not get hurt, and to like get out of his head and play the way that we've seen him be capable of. So he's the guy I would take a swing on. And plus, whatever. So you draft him, you'll get him late. And then if he gets hurt, you throw him in your IR. If he stinks, you drop him. Like all four of these guys are people that I wouldn't draft high enough that I'd be so worried that I just have to drop him. Like I don't want to rely on one of these people. They're not my like number one goalie in fantasy. So I'm going to take Murray first. Then I'll take Talbot, because I think he's going to start for Ottawa, at least to start the season, even though I kind of agree with you that Forsberg seems better. But I think they'll play Talbot. And then I'll go Samsonov and Forsberg like equal, actually. Like I don't know, I think maybe I'll go Samsonov just because I'm more confident that Murray will get injured or be terrible than Talbot, so Samsonov has a better chance to like take over as the starter. So yeah, that's my order. Murray,
and at what point are you going to take the risk on Murray as the top guy in your group? Like would you say when you're drafting 60 point forward, 65 point forwards?
No, like well the way I play is it's tiering, right? Like the way I do I guess if it's an auction draft, it's a little different. If it's a snake draft, I sort of will have my goalie tiers. And like once I see that there's no goalies that I think have the upside that Murray has, that's when I would take him. It's not about like among which forwards. It's like which goalies kind of are left, if that makes sense. And he'll be pretty far down the list, right? Like we'll do a Schmore goalies board episode and we'll talk through the goalies, but I'm not like, I'm taking Murray at a point where if he ends up being a bust, it's not killing me, right? I'm not gonna be like, oh man, I could have drafted Claude Giroux, but I took Matt Murray. Like that's not gonna happen.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying like you got to be careful with any of these guys, but that's the one you take the chance on if you could have one of them. I mean, and my heart wants to say Anton Forsberg, but I understand that's not reasonable. I
think you should follow your heart, Brian, because last year you were talking about Jake Ottinger and saying how you think he's the best on Dallas, and I was like, Brian, we can't rank a goalie in Schmore goalies board that's going to start in the minors. He can't be, and you were like, I just have a feeling, but you turned out to be right.
But he was going to be so much better than what Dallas had, and I don't know that, as you said, Forsberg is going to be that. By the way, for anyone following, the Leafs do have a new goaltending coach this year, Curtis Sanford, former NHLer. They had Steve Briere was their goaltending coach for the last 7 years. Stinks to be him, but he's already gotten a new job with Seattle. So
Ooh, he's got his work cut out for him.
Yeah, like you know what? Now we'll see if he's like. It's a great chance for him. He's Seattle's reclamation project. Maybe he can prove that hey, he wasn't the problem in Toronto by fixing Grubauer.
Wow.
This is Steve Briere's time to shine.
And if you love was it Briere?
Briere.
If you love Steve, if you believe in Steve Briere, then maybe you draft Grubauer. I'd probably take Grubauer over Matt Murray. Like I'll give a chance to Grubauer
I
for
would
next
too.
year.
Yeah.
All right, I guess we should move on. Let me throw a random Leafs name at you before we go. Remember last year how like there was all these random guys who would get a shot in the top six, and we talk about like your Makhayevs, who's gone now, Andre Kasha, who's gone now. So here's the new name, a long-time fan of ours. Wait, that's not how you say it. A long-time person that we've been a fan on the podcast. Like we mentioned him at least once or twice this season. Kalle Yarncroc is a UFA that the Leafs signed, 4 years, 2.1 AAV. I could see him getting in the top six at some point, playing with like a Tavares and a Nylander type situation. So he's someone. I'm not saying like you have to draft him, but I'm saying he's someone that will get some play on keeping Karlsson throughout the season as Toronto, throws out the line blender. What do you think of that? You like Yarncroc?
Just give me 1 sec. I'm just checking something. Am I responding to the last thing you said or? Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I like Yarncroc there, especially since there is a possibility that like the Leafs are over the cap right now, and I'm not totally up to speed on what their plan is to get under it. But Alex Kerfoot could be part of that plan. So if he does get sent off, then Yarncroc can maybe slide in to that second line a little more easily. But yeah, he's someone honestly, Elon, for there's been enough years that we've been like, oh, Yarncroc's getting the opportunity, and then he doesn't do much with it. And he also doesn't take a lot of shots either historically. So yeah, I'm not going to get too excited about him, but I think he's more like a Kasha than a Mikheyev. Is that fair?
And that means worse?
Yes.
Okay. Mikheyev, he went to Vancouver. So I don't know if we'll get to him on this episode, but we'll definitely have to discuss if we think he's going to have an impact there. But let's keep with the plan we had, which is to move on from Toronto and go to Ilya Samsonov's old home. So we're going to talk next about the impacts over in Washington. But we'll do that in just a sec because I think it's time for a little break. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Okay, we are back. And like I said, Brian, I want to go next to the Washington Capitals, who not only gave up on Ilya Samsonov, but they also traded Vitek Vanacek to the Devils for a second round pick, or I guess a second round upgrade. They sent a pick and got a better pick and then also got a third. So whatever. Basically, they gave Vanacek away. And to fill the void in net, they signed Stanley Cup champion Darcy Kemper to a 5-year, $5 million plus per year contract. They also signed the previously mentioned Charlie Lindgren to a 3-year, $3.3 million deal to be the backup. And by the way, Lindgren, he had a strong season last year in Springfield of the AHL. He had a .925 save percentage. He had that amazing stint in St. Louis. He played 5 games, won all 5 of them while Binnington and Husso were hurt with a .958 save percentage. So I think good for Lindgren to earn himself a one-way NHL contract for 3 years after like being someone that I just assumed was like out of the league forever. Like remember he was a Habs prospect, and when Carey Price would get injured, it seemed like they would like lose every game with Lindgren, and now good for him. So we'll see how he works out in Washington. But of course, the big name here is Darcy Kemper. Brian, what do you think about Kemper as a cap? Like last year, people were drafting him super high after he signed with the Avs, and while he struggled at first and seemed like a bust, I recall us doing like a mid-season episode talking about how big of a bust he was. By the end, he was great, right? He had a really strong regular season overall. Like .921 save percentage was definitely a key part of Mike Cupful winning team. And then in the playoffs, he was good enough to win the Stanley Cup. So now he goes to Washington. Do you think he's someone that you would draft just as high like next year on Washington as you would have if he was still on Colorado?
No, I don't. And that's not a knock on Darcy Kemper. That's just you're moving from Colorado, a team that is a favorite to win every single night, to Washington, who's still a pretty formidable squad, but they're not Colorado. And they also, we'll see what kind of protection Washington can offer. Sorry, just I'm slowing down. Just give me a sec. But we'll see what kind of protection Washington can offer Kemper, because actually, if you're looking at expected goals against per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 last season, they were pretty equal, Colorado and Washington, in how quality they were in preventing chances from their team, both top 10 teams in the league. So that's promising for Darcy Kemper, that he's not going to see, he might potentially not see a more difficult workload. Of course, you might have less run support, and that might lead to fewer wins. So I'd be worried about that. But if you're looking at Darcy Kemper on the whole, I think you're still interested as one of very few. We've been talking about this on our Discord server. There are fewer and fewer workhorse goalies available in the NHL these days. And I think this contract makes Kemper likely to stay as one of them, although the aforementioned Charlie Lindgren could be breathing down his neck before long if things don't go right. But Washington has a lot invested in this guy, and I think they're going to give Kemper a lot of chances to succeed.
Yeah, I'd be pretty excited to draft Darcy Kemper. Like, he's the kind of goalie that I'd like to, I'm not going to like spend like a top pick. At this point, maybe I would actually use a really high pick on Vasilevsky, Shesterkin. But like, if I can't get one of them, then probably I'm going to pass on a lot of the goalies that go next. Then maybe would end up grabbing I got Kemper last year, actually, after a lot of goalies got taken in the auction draft. So yeah, I could see myself landing with him again, and I'd be pretty happy with that. Brian, about a month, I think this was on the last Patreon cast for sure. Like, at one point there was a question that led to me just like coming up with a Schmore goalies board tiers just off the top of my head, just of the goalies who had, we knew where they would be. And I had like one tier with like a Sorokin, Ottinger, Frederick Anderson, and Hellebuck. And then like the next tier was like Binnington, Leonard, Merzlikins, Gibson, Jari. Like, which of those groups do you think Kemper fits in more with to you, that top group or the second group?
Oh, is there like a visual? Do you still have the link that you
It's
made?
in my notes. I just wrote it. Look on my show notes.
Oh, okay. Great. Thanks. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. I would put Kemper in. Yeah, I honestly, I think he falls, like we were doing half tiers for a while. He kind of falls in between, because I don't think Kemper is as difficult to beat as Ettinger and Hellebuck, and doesn't play for teams that plays defensively as Anderson and Sorokin, who are both good goalies in their own rights too. So I think, I look at Binnington and Lehner and Merzlikins and Gibson and Jari, and I see great upside, but I also see the potential for downside and things to go wrong. And that's where I see Darcy Kemper. So I think he belongs more in tier 4 than tier 3.
Yeah, that makes sense. Though I think I'd maybe have him at the top of that tier 4 at this point. And then, okay, let's look at the Caps forwards. I feel like a lot of people like to talk about how the Caps are like done. A lot of times we're chatting on our Discord and people are asking like, okay, who are, if the Sens are now going to potentially become a playoff team, like who are they bumping? Like who's falling out of the playoffs? And the Caps are a team that people are assuming at some point soon are going to be done, especially with both Nicholas Backstrom and Tom Wilson expected to be out to start the year. Who knows when they'll be healthy? But the Caps did make an attempt to address these players leaving. They traded for Connor Brown, like we talked about. So, Brian, you obviously know Connor Brown very well as a Sens fan, so you could comment on what you think he brings to the team. They also signed Dylan Strome to a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. And we all know Strome had that great run in the second half last year with Chicago. I assume with Backstrom out, Strome is probably the front runner to center the second line. Unless, I don't think Lars Eller. I think Lars Eller, he just sounds like a third line center, right? And that's not like saying that Strome is better than Eller. I just think you have Eller on the defensive third line, and then you have Dylan Strome centering a line of could be a good line, right? What if it's Kuznetsov and Ovechkin will be together, of course, with I guess maybe Oshie or maybe Connor Sherry, and then that could leave let's say if it's with Sherry, that was a pretty good line for a while. Sherry Kuznetsov and Ovechkin. So that would leave Dylan Strome with Oshie and Mantha, or maybe Connor Brown if you think that he fits into the top 6. So I still think that Washington is I think people who are worried that Washington is about to totally fall off, as long as Ovechkin is there and he's not showing signs of falling off, and now they have a decent goalie, they still have John Karlsson on deal, I think they're still going to be a decent team. And I'm curious to know what do you think the fantasy upside is of someone like a Dylan Strome who comes in, is going to be easy to draft super late. Do you think there's upside here for him to continue what he was doing at the end of last season in Chicago?
It's going to be really hard for Strome to keep that up, because Strome has never struck me as a player who's really the one driving things. And this is he was disappointing on Arizona, and he ended up being disappointing in Chicago too. And his biggest successes basically came when he was playing with top tier elite talent. And that wasn't even always a guarantee that Strome can get in on production. Like last year, his great runs came with Kane and DeBrincat. The years before, when he was good, and even when he was bad, he was still with elite players, which I don't think he's going to get in Washington, because your one elite line mate there is Alex Ovechkin, and he's sticking with Kuznetsov unless, whenever Backstrom's healthy. But we saw them Backstrom stay on the second line, even when he was healthy. The player I'm actually looking most closely at for a little fantasy bump, the newest arrival, and you mentioned him already, is Connor Brown, who was like a really serviceable top 6 player, and I think was probably one of the most added players in the Cupful, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, kkupfl.com, over the course of the season, because he was a really good streamer, but the sort who could stick on your roster for like a month because he kept doing enough to be worth holding on to while, say, other players got injured. He wasn't a guy you rushed to drop off your roster. And I think there's a decent chance, like Ovechkin and Kuznetsov were playing with Tom Wilson for like the first 3 quarters of last season. But even with a healthy Tom Wilson, he was moved to the second line for, say, the last 15 or so games. And Connor Sherry, as you mentioned, Elon, was put up there, which worked a little, but not a lot. And I actually wonder if that's a role that Connor Brown can fill. I think there's a possibility here that Connor Brown could play with Ovechkin and Kuznetsov, which would be great for his fantasy value. Of course, don't lock it in or anything, but this is a storyline I'd be watching for Washington Capitals camp. And I think we have a Samantha Pell interview coming up on 32 Beats as well. So I'll be curious to hear what she has to say about Connor Brown's likelihood of getting on the top line, because I really do think it's top line or bust in Washington for fantasy value. I hear what you're saying, that like, don't leave this team for dead. They still have enough to be good enough to make the playoffs and contend. But as far as fantasy value goes, I'm not looking past that top line.
Yeah, that's fair. Someone will really have to show it. And yeah, I just know that a lot of people were expecting that when it was announced that both Backstrom and Wilson will be out. They were like, oh, is it Connor McMichael season? Is it Alexei Protas season? I think we might have to wait one more season. I think that they've plugged in those top 6 spots, at least for now, barring injury, of course. Okay, so we mentioned how Vanacek got moved from the Capitals to the Devils. Let's go to New Jersey now, who were very busy themselves. Looks like they're going to be rolling with a Vanacek-Blackwood tandem. They've obviously got Nico Dawes, who played a bit last year, available to come in if Blackwood gets injured. They also traded Ty Smith away for John Marino. They signed another defenseman, Brendan Smith. So it looks like their defense pairs could be like a Hamilton and Siegenthaler, Severson with Graves, Marino and Smith. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Just basically, I'm just trying to tell you that I think that they could have somewhat decent defense for Vanacek, Blackwood to play in front of, assuming everyone is healthy. Dougie is at 100%. Don't forget, they've also got Simon Nemec and Luke Hughes on the way. That's probably still a year away. They also signed Andre Palat to a 5-year contract, $30 million per year. I'm going to go ahead and say right now, I'm not interested in drafting Andre Palat. Maybe he'll be good, to help the team be better defensively or something, but he's not someone I'm too excited about, but maybe Brian will disagree. What else did they do? Oh, they traded Pavel Zacha for Eric Haula. I think Haula probably just because, almost for sure is a third line center, right? You're probably going to roll. Here's my guess. Jack Hughes, Bratt, and Sharangovich. That was such a good line. Keep them together. Then you could go with Hischier, with Mercer and Palat. And then maybe Haula with Tatar and, I don't know, Andreas Janssen. Maybe Alex Holtz gets in one of those spots. So, but anyways, it looks like it could be a pretty sweet top 6. And yeah, so Palat is good. I just don't think for fantasy, he's not someone I'm rushing to grab. So Brian, first of all, is this the year where I'll finally be right in saying that I think New Jersey is going to be good? Obviously, the goaltending is a big question mark. So maybe let's start there. Let's start with the goaltending. Do you think Vanacek has a shot to run away as a starting goalie, or do you think it's like a tandem? Or really, there's no way to know because we just don't know if Blackwood, he seems like they don't like him, but they've said now that they are confident to go into next season with this as the tandem. We don't know his health situation. What's your gut feeling right now in terms of, are we just going to be placing these two guys in the tandems group for Schmore Goalies board, or is there some? Okay, so that answers that.
They're going to be in the tandems group. The funny part is Vanacek and Samsonov had all of last season for one of them to prove I can be the starting goalie here in Washington. What did Washington do at the end of the year? Well, after an entire year, I still remember in the last week of the season, I think Laviolette was saying, the coach, oh yeah, we'll see who emerges and who shows themselves that we're ready. We've been waiting for someone. We'd really love for someone to do it now. Anytime now, guys. And then they did not. And now they're both sent packing, and Washington is going with 2 brand new goalies. And I think that speaks to what Vanacek and Samsonov have proven themselves capable of. Is there a chance they can be better than they were last year? Sure. But like I said, Washington was a pretty good defensive team, and it just wasn't working with them. If I had to pick one of the two to do well based on what I saw last season, it would be Vitek Vanacek, but I would still not say that he has a huge advantage, or any advantage really, over Mackenzie Blackwood in net. So I would call them a tandem. And honestly, I would like to see Nico Dawes get time. Like,
Is Nico Dawes this year's Jake Ottinger, the one who starts in the minors, will end up being the better one?
That's a good one. I think he could be the best of the three. I just don't know. I mean, you've got to think Blackwood's going to get injured at some point. I don't know that Dawes is going to. I think Dawes is not necessarily a workhorse like Edinger is. Like, Edinger could come in and just take all the games and do well. I think Dawes plays well with enough rest, which is what we saw happen last season. He would come in, do well for a couple games, but then when they kept going to him because their only other option was John Gillies, who had played terribly. He fell apart. So I don't think it'll be quite the same, but yeah, I think it's very possible that of these three goalies, the one with the best next 3 years is Nico Dawes.
Okay, and then regarding Andre Palat, so he's coming off. I just wanted to get your take here. Last year, he had 49 points in 77 games, so 52-point pace, barely rosterable in like some leagues, not even 2 shots per game. Are we expecting the same, or do you think there's any reason to expect like an uptick in his new team?
Expectations are going to be high, right? Because the Devils lost out on Gaudreau. Everybody was holding their breath, waiting for Gaudreau, and Gaudreau never came. But when you're playing on a line with Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt, I'm not sure if that's the line that Palat lands on. I'm not sure how many shots he's going to be in line for adding to his totals. I think his whole career, he's been a 2-shot per game guy. He's played in a couple different roles in Tampa as that 2-shot per game guy and has always stayed that 2-shot per game guy. So yeah, until I see otherwise, I'm not going to expect Andre Palat to start taking a whole lot more shots. I guess my one question is whether he can fit in on the top power play, which he's only ever done once in his career, which is when Kucherov was out, right? And that's when he had this huge 70-point season for Tampa. So if there's room for Palat on the top power play in New Jersey, he's someone I could see as being the player who benefits from being with a new team. Like, this is an opportunity for him to break out of that 50-point mold and enter a 60-plus point mold if he can be on that top unit, which I don't know. It's hard to tell.
It's possible.
If there's room for there's Hughes and there's Bratt for sure. And Hischier. And then you've got room for one more. So it's going to be Palat or Sharangovich. Maybe Dawson Mercer gets a look. I think Palat, I feel like he might have the inside track on that.
Also, yeah, he could be kind of like a net front type guy, right? On the top power play. Whenever I always get in trouble when I try to like dig into like who's playing where.
Well, he's never really played on the one time he played consistently on the top unit. He was playing in Kucherov's spot, so not net front, and I think he's more likely to flank either side. So
okay,
I don't know if he could, but he hasn't.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe there is more upside there. I also took a little bit of pain when you said that he'll be on the top line with Hughes and Bratt, just because I don't know why. I just kind of like Sharangovich. Like, I feel
me
like
too. It's not a guarantee. That was like the best case scenario. So if he does end up on a line with, say, Hischier and Mercer, I mean, Mercer doesn't shoot a ton. Hischier doesn't either. So maybe Palat could take a couple more. But again, I'm going to wait to see how that shakes out. But I think, Elon, we might have found our guy who could have more value in his new home than he did in his last one.
Nah, I don't know. Maybe he could, but I'm still more excited about Brent Burns.
I mean, you remember how high it was on Tomas Tatar last year. So I should learn my lesson from that, right? I'm not going to get excited about a New Jersey Devil. I'm not going to get excited about a New Jersey Devil.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I think the Devils, I'm not worried about them scoring goals, right? Like, I'm hoping they're bringing Palat in to help them, like, just a good two-way player, and like leadership and blah, blah, blah. Like, I feel like leave the scoring to Hughes, Bratt, Hischier, Mercer, Sharangovich, and maybe like Holtz one day. Anyway, That's my opinion. But they're a very exciting team, right? With these defensemen coming up, Nemec and Luke Hughes, with Hamilton, Severson, Graves. I think John Marino, who we didn't really talk about, like he's a good two-way player. Like Ty Smith, they didn't need it. Like Ty Smith is like not amazing defensively, but like a high upside, potential power play quarterback. But obviously they don't need him. So I think I like the moves. Obviously the goalie tandem is a risk, but I don't know, not that much more risky than Toronto's goalie tandem, right? So okay. Anyways, speaking of Ty Smith, let's go to his new home in Pittsburgh. Not to really talk too much about Ty Smith. I guess we could talk about him for a second, but obviously the biggest moves they made were 3 big contract extensions. So here's a team where they didn't actually change much, but they kept the group together for many more years now. They extended Letang 6 years, 6.1 mil. They extended Malkin also 6.1 mil for 4 years. They extended Ricard Raquel 6 years, 5 million. So I don't know. Here, Brian, I'll throw you a question for each of them. Then you can answer whichever ones you want. Letang. Did we talk enough about Letang's 68 points in 78 games last season? He was really awesome, and I feel like we barely discussed him. And remember, he used to be a guy who'd always be worried about drafting because of injuries. He's had a couple years in a row now, just solid, putting up tons of points. Do we have a big reason to expect him to fall off, or do you think he'll just do this again next year? Malkin, still, like, we're doing our patron rankings, right, every single day. What number did we do? We're in like the late 40s, I think, at this point. Where are we here? Thanks so much, by the way, to Andrea and Joel for keeping this going. Yeah, today was vote 46. Still no mention of Malkin, not a single vote. And he's a guy who's been like above point per game basically every year of his career, including last year, 42 points in 41 games. Obviously, the big concern is he's injured all the time, but he's healthy now, as far as I know. So maybe people are sleeping on this guy, and he's someone who would be a great value pick if you're getting him in like the 5th round of your fantasy draft. So there's a question to you. Are we sleeping on Malkin? And let me throw you a question about Ricard Raquel, who had that 69-point breakout in 2017-18 with the Ducks. Since then, he's just been like a blah 50-ish point guy. I've always thought he had more to give. He went to Pittsburgh, kind of boring, like 13 points in 19 games. Though, like, if you look at his game log, all of those points are basically in multi-point games. Like, he was either putting up a 0-point game or a multi-point game in those 19 games before the playoffs. He played a lot with Gensel and Gensel and Crosby. So if he lands in a spot like that, that'd be pretty sweet. Here's my question for Raquel for you, okay? Raquel or Brian Rust? Who do you like better for next year? Because Rust obviously was better last year and has been better for a while, like 58 points in 60 games last season. But if you look at those last 19 games after Raquel joined the team, Rust only had 10 points to end the season in 19 games. Raquel had 13. So I don't know. It's okay. So to recap, Letang, can he do it again? Malkin, are we sleeping on him? Raquel, how does he compare to Brian Rust? Go.
Okay, Letang, I think we can expect the same from him. He basically did what he's done for most of the last 10 years, which is play really well. The one thing that Letang did differently last year compared to all the others is he played 78 games. He last played like his high before that in the last, well, actually, that's the second highest total in Letang's career for games played. So that's what he did differently. He played in all the games, or almost all the games, to put up a 71-point pace. Years prior, he had a 67-point pace. He had a 71-point pace. He had a 68-point pace, but he played 55, 65, 40 games in each of those seasons. So you didn't feel it, but you felt it with Chris Letang this year. So whether you're going to take a chance on that, on him being healthy again, go for it. The last time he was this healthy, Letang played 79 games and followed that up with 3 incomplete seasons. One, of course, COVID affected, but he still missed time in that COVID shortened season. Then Evgeny Malkin. Yeah, I think every year people sleep on Evgeny Malkin. I don't know what to say. I mean, he's also someone who's incredibly unreliable because of all the time he misses. And I think there was one year, if I'm remembering right, where his status was never clear. And it was messing up with like where you could put him on your roster and whether to expect him to actually play on a given night. So I think there's been a lot of cloudiness around his status. I mean, the guy's played only 77 games over his last 2 seasons. So that's enough to put a dent in his value for sure. But I'm trying to see who the latest forwards taken were in our... we have Max Pacioretty, Vladimir Tarasenko, Elias Pettersson have been the most recent forwards taken. I think that's around where I take Malkin. Like I see we have votes for Svechnikov and Lindholm and Fiala and Ehlers. I mean, it's all about risk reward with Malkin. It's the same story as always. The guy's still capable. He's entering his age 36 season. So I actually don't know. This guy's been so unhealthy for most of his career. It's hard to know if he's going to be impacted further by age. You've got to think the mileage hurts. And so that's a reason to, think of him as a point per game player who's only going to help you in half the weeks. So that's the caveat on Malkin, and the reason why I wouldn't say you're sleeping on Malkin for not having him in your top 50 players to draft, but you should at least be thinking about him. Like, he should be in your queue, ready to click when you're seeing that there's nobody else with his kind of upside if he does play 70 games somehow. And then Rickard Rakell versus Brian Rust, that is the big question. And I think I'm not going to have much of an answer for you, Elon, until training camp. I'm not going to try and predict it. But of course, the guy who plays with Crosby and Gensel, in the money. The guy who plays away from them, screwed. And I'm not going to want to jump on either of these guys without having some kind of assurance that they are going to get that top end deployment. So I am not rushing out to grab either of these guys unless I have some kind of clarity that they're going to be playing. And even then, I know how much that blender goes in Pittsburgh on Crosby's wing, and I'm not excited to participate in that. So I would actually avoid both Rakell and Rust, as great as I believe they both can be. Like, I loved the Rakell acquisition at the deadline for Pittsburgh. I'm so happy they've kept him. I think he's a really good piece to play with Crosby and Gensel. I'm just not sure he's going to spend a lot of time there.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, in the worst case, maybe he plays with Malkin on the second line, which is still pretty good, but for the games that Malkin is healthy. But yeah, I think basically the answer there is, like, don't draft Rust based on his total points from last year, because there's some risk there. Let someone else take Rust, and then maybe you could get Rakell like a few rounds later when you're not taking as big of a risk, and you might even get the next Brian Rust. So that would be the hope. And if he turns out not to be as good, you didn't use a high pick on him. Anyways, I'm not even done with Pittsburgh, right? So I told you they traded John Marino for Ty Smith. Sorry. They also traded Mike Matheson and a fourth for Jeff Petrie and Ryan Poehling to the Habs. So Ty Smith is in, Jeff Petrie is in. I don't know. It's been so long since there's been like a second fantasy relevant defenseman in Pittsburgh outside of Letang. Like, there was like some times when Letang would be injured and Justin Schultz would be worth rostering, but that's pretty much it. So I don't know. Are you into I feel like if Letang gets injured, it'll be a fun discussion on the podcast of like, is it Ty Smith or Jeff Petrie jumping up on the top power play? I guess I'd be more like, I think probably I think for sure, actually, the second Penguin defenseman I draft is Jeff Petrie. Maybe he is someone I'll draft. I think he takes a huge hit, right? Like, from Montreal, he was finally turning, after being so terrible. This is what we talked about in that recent episode where we were talking about all the biggest surprises. And Petrie was both a big surprise in being so terrible to start the year, and then he was a huge surprise in how much he turned things around when Martin St. Louis took over. And I would have been excited to get Petrie late in drafts, but a lot like Anton Forsberg, I feel like this really, clips his wings off. And now he's like a depth guy that maybe I'll grab late because he's good for peripherals and maybe we'll play some minutes. But obviously, there's no chance he's getting significant power play time. And I don't even know how many points, because who else on Pittsburgh ever gets a lot of even strength points as a defenseman that's not Letang?
Exactly, which is why I'm not ascribing much fancy value to either of these guys. If Letang gets injured, let's talk. Until then, no thanks.
Okay, what's next here? Okay, how about quickly Mike Matheson? We have a lot to go. Okay, we're going to have to do another episode for sure, because I don't think we're going to get through everything properly. I'll quickly, since I brought up Mike Matheson being traded to the Habs, okay, this is a different story now, right? Like, Petrie's gone. Like, who is there? Who's the top power play defenseman? Maybe Mike Matheson gets like last year was Chris Weidman, who was in that job, was totally like useless for fantasy, got a power play assist every once in a while. That was the only stat he would ever rack up. Meanwhile, Matheson, 31 points in 74 games with the Pens last year, but he only played 18 minutes and 48 seconds per game on average. Got to imagine Matheson's going to be seeing a lot more ice time with the Habs. Like, good luck naming two more Habs defensemen next year. Like, Romanov's gone to the Islanders, like we talked about last week. So they're like, I feel like Matheson, it's his job to, if he wants it, he could play all the minutes and he could probably get top power play if he earns it. I guess the question is, can he earn it? Like, everyone talks about how he had a pretty solid season with Pittsburgh last year. Maybe not to justify that big contract, but I don't know. He's someone that I'm kind of interested. I don't know if I'm like ready right now to say like go for sure grab Mike Matheson as a sleeper for next year, but he's a name I'll be watching closely in training camp to see what kind of deployment he's getting.
I will say that if you look at shot generation per 60 minutes on the power play, and Mike Matheson didn't have a ton of minutes, but he was a reasonably big shooter. He is a top 20 shooter amongst defensemen. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot. The list has a lot of quality players on it, but it's also got a lot of questionable players. Like Dylan Coghlan is up at the top. leading in shots per 60. And we know he wasn't terribly fantasy relevant for most of the year. You've also got guys like Colin Miller in the top 20 and Matt Dumba. But it's a sign, it's something that Mike Matheson knows how to get the puck on net with the man advantage. And I think that is something worth like considering in terms of fantasy value. So I'll be watching. I don't think the Montreal power play is going to be a place to, really load up. You've got Suzuki, of course, you've got Caulfield, you've got Hoffman. It's going to be a place where, you could pick up a few points, but at 5-on-5, I don't think you're doing a whole lot. Like Matheson is going to be so fantasy relevant. He's not someone I think I need to take. If I'm looking for a power play quarterback flyer as my third or fourth defenseman very late in my draft, maybe my fourth defenseman and not my third. I'll look at Mike Matheson then. But even if he is the top power play in Montreal, we're not sure how long it'll last. We've never really seen him in the role, but there is a reason to think that he might be capable of playing it, which is more than we can say about Chris Weidman, right? From what we've seen from Weidman, who didn't do anything with the role. So it'd be nice if they tried someone new to give us all us fancy managers a chance to have one more relevant defenseman in the player pool.
Well, yeah, and hey, Petrie did really well last year at the end, even not on the top power play. So, like, I think with all the minutes that I'm expecting Matheson to get, if I was doing a mock draft right now with no information, like I'm not leaving him undrafted. Like again, I'm not like taking a swing on him, but like before this trade, I wouldn't have even considered Mike Matheson in any mock draft. And now, I'm going to take a flyer on this guy as like you said, like a fourth defenseman, and who knows, maybe he'll end up being worth rostering all season long. So okay, Brian, it's we're done with another hour here, and so we're going to have to end this show. Part 2 is going to have to come to an end while we've still left some pretty big names not discussed. So here's a preview for part 3. We haven't yet talked about Edmonton and how they signed Jack Campbell and they extended Evander Kane. Detroit got Perron, Kopp, Kubalik, Sherratt, Husso. So Detroit, big change. We're gonna have a lot of fun talking about Detroit. Very sorry, Shams, that he didn't. They didn't come up yet today. The Rangers signed Trocheck. That's big. Seattle got Burakovsky. We'll discuss if that's something worth knowing. Dallas signed Mason Marchment, who had that great year. Vancouver, we brought up Mikheyev. Anaheim signed Frank Vetrano and Ryan Strome. Chicago signed Domi and Athanasiou. So I think all of these things are worth discussing. So stay tuned for part 3. But in the meantime, hope you enjoyed listening to these first 2 parts of us breaking down the free agents. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the shows. We really love feedback. So you could tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson or hit us up in the episode discussion channel on Discord. And let us know what you thought of our takes. If you think we got anything really wrong, if you think there's someone who increased their value more than Brent Burns, or who was Brian's pick again? Some
Andre
boring guy,
Palat.
Andre Palat, during this past couple weeks. But with that, Brian, like we had our little lame attempt in the last episode of asking people to leave us a 5-star review. So if you want to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we'd appreciate it. If you want to come join our Patreon community, it's always fun to make new friends. So come to keepingkarlsson.com/patron for more information. But with that, let's cue the outro music. And Brian, why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
All right. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dobber Hockey and powered by our patrons, including our super supporters, Patty, Rob, David, Derek, Tom, Andrea, Flash, and Tyler. Thank you to Shams for being here in the chat with us for the entire time and for keeping the amazing stream of fantasy news rolling on all of our essential fantasy hockey Twitter accounts. Find them at gamedaytweets.com.
To be fair, he hasn't been doing too many starting goalie or line combo tweets lately. So Shams, if you could pick that up, that would be nice. The news is there, but the other 2 are kind of lacking.
Okay, very funny. You can also follow Ben and Lewis at Short Shifts KK. I think they're tweeting sporadically through the off season. And also want to thank again Andrea and Joel, amazing members of our patron community who are running the patron rankings on Discord. Logo art by BrandonWeeb.com. Outro music from Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dobber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dobber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, The Athletic, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and NBC Sports Edge.
All right. Great job as always, Brian. This has been such a blast. Thanks, everyone, again for listening. Hope you enjoyed these first 2 parts. And Brian, what should we all do while we eagerly anticipate your wet blanket and water buckets of water. Wait, as we eagerly anticipate all the buckets of cold water that you're going to pour on the remaining uh, players who signed as UFAs. What should we do while we wait for that exciting time?
As cold as I may appear, Elon, I actually have a lot of warmth to give, and I invite everyone to show your warmth too, to make sure that fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Nice. I think Evander Kane is going to be good. And like, I'll be surprised. Like, you know, I'll be surprised if you're like, he's going to stink. That seems unlikely. That's my pick for the next episode of the player
I
that
don't think
Brian's
I've
going to be
said
the highest on.
I don't think I've said too many people are going to stink.
Right. Or I mean, I'm going to come in excited about Evander Kane's fantasy value, and I have a feeling you'll agree. That's my hunch, but we'll see. And I think he might be the only one of all the players we're going to talk about. So, okay. Great job, pal. That was fun. Thanks so much for Shams and everyone who joined.
I'm going to post 2 separate write-ups. Are we doing
Yeah.
426 and 427?
No, let's do 426 part 1 and 426 part 2. Whatever you want to do, actually. I don't care.
Well, how does PDO cast do it?
They don't do numbers. They're not like us.
Maybe we should get rid of numbers.
But now we've counted so high. We've counted to such a high number.
It's like a brag. We've done this many episodes.
You could just do 426 can be UFA breakdown part 1, and then 427 is UFA breakdown part 2. You could just do it like that. That sounds good.
Sorry, did you say 26 and 27?
Yeah, so it'll be 426 will be called UFA breakdown part 1, and then 427 will be UFA breakdown part 2. Okay, sounds good. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye everyone. Thanks.
This is my Forrest Gump.
Very good.
Is that, can your video handle it? Okay. That wasn't even funny. I don't know what I'm doing. It's late. All right, bye.